Chapter 12. Anthony tells his story. Mr. Anthony Cade, announced Treadwell. Enter suspicious stranger from village inn, said Anthony. He made his way toward Lord Caterham with a kind of instinct rare in strangers. At the same time he summed up the other three men in his own mind thus: 1. Scotland Yard. 2. Local dignitary, probably chief constable. 3. Harassed gentleman on the verge of apoplexy, possibly connected with the government. I must apologize, continued Anthony, still addressing Lord Caterham, for forcing my way in like this. I mean, but it was rumored round the Jolly Dog, or whatever the name of your local pub may be, that you had had a murder up here, and as I thought I may be able to throw some light upon it, I came along. For a moment or two, no one spoke. Superintendent Battle, because he was a man of ripe experience who knew how infinitely better it was to let everyone else speak if they could be persuaded upon to do so. Colonel Melrose, because he was habitually taciturn. George, because he was in the habit of having notice given him of the question. Lord Caterham, because he had not the least idea of what to say. The silence of the other three, however, and the fact that he had been directly addressed, finally forced speech upon the last named. Quite so, he said nervously. Won't you, sit down? Thank you, said Anthony. George cleared his throat portentously. When you say you can throw light upon this matter, you mean? I mean, said Anthony, that I was trespassing upon Lord Caterham's property, for which I hope he will forgive me, last night at about 11:45, and that I actually heard the shot fired. I can at any rate fix the time of the crime for you. He looked round at the three in turn, his eyes resting longest on Superintendent Battle, the impassivity of whose face he seemed to appreciate. But I hardly think that that's news to you, he added gently. Meaning by that, Mr. Cade? Asked Battle. Just this. I put on shoes when I got up this morning. Later, when I asked for my boots, I couldn't of them. Some nice young constable had called round for them, so I naturally put two and two together, and hurried up here to clear my character if possible. A very sensible move, said Battle noncommittally. Anthony's eyes twinkled a little. I appreciate your reticence, Inspector. It is Inspector, isn't it? Lord Caterham interposed. He was beginning to take a fancy to Anthony. Superintendent Battle of Scotland Yard. This is Colonel Melrose, our chief constable, and Mr. Lomax. Anthony looked sharply at George. Mr. George Lomax. Yes, I think, Mr. Lomax, said Anthony, that I had the pleasure of receiving a letter from you yesterday. George stared at him. I think not, he said coldly, but he wished that Miss Oscar were here. Miss Oscar wrote all his letters for him, and remembered who they were to and what they were about. A great man like PG 102 George could not possibly remember all these annoying details. I think, Mr. Cade, he hinted, that you were about to give us some, explanation of what you were doing in the grounds last night at 11:45. His tone said plainly, and whatever it may be, we are not likely to believe it. Yes, Mr. Cade, what were you doing? Said Lord Caterham, with lively interest. Well, said Anthony regretfully, I'm afraid it's rather a long story. He drew out his cigarette case. May I? Lord Caterham nodded, and Anthony lit a cigarette and braced himself for the ordeal. He was aware, none better, of the peril in which he stood. In the short space of 24 hours, he had become embroiled in two separate crimes. His actions in connection with the first would not bear looking into for a second. After deliberately disposing of one body, and so defeating the aims of justice, he had arrived upon the scene of the second crime at the exact moment when it was being committed. For a young man looking for trouble, he could hardly have done better. South America, thought Anthony to himself, simply isn't in it with this. He had already decided upon his course of action. He was going to tell the truth, with one trifling alteration and one grave suppression. The story begins, said Anthony, about 3 weeks ago in Bulawayo. Mr. Lomax, of course, knows where that is, outpost of the Empire, What do we know of England who only England know? All that sort of thing. I was conversing with a friend of mine, a Mr. James McGrath. He brought out the name slowly, with a thoughtful eye on George. George bounded in his seat and repressed an exclamation with difficulty. The upshot of our conversation was that I came to England to carry out a little commission for Mr. McGrath, who was unable to go himself. Since the passage was booked in his name, I traveled as James McGrath. I don't know what particular kind of offense that was. The superintendent can tell me, I dare say, and run me in for so many months hard if necessary. We'll get on with the story, if you please, sir, said Battle, but his eyes twinkled a little. On arrival in London I went to the Blitz Hotel, still as James McGrath. My business in London was to deliver a certain manuscript to a firm of publishers, but almost immediately I received deputations from the representatives of two political parties of a foreign kingdom. The methods of one were strictly constitutional, the methods of the other were not. I dealt with them both accordingly. But my troubles were not over. That night my room was broken into, and an attempt at burglary was made by one of the waiters at the hotel. That was not reported to the police, I think, said Superintendent Battle. You are right. It was not. Nothing was taken, you see, but I did report the occurrence to the manager of the hotel, and he will confirm my story, and tell you that the waiter in question decamped rather abruptly in the middle of the night. The next day, the publishers rang me up, and suggested that one of their representatives would call upon me and receive the manuscript. I agreed to this, and the arrangement was duly carried out on the following morning. Since I have heard nothing further, I presume the manuscript reached them safely. Yesterday, still as James McGrath, I received a letter from Mr. Lomax. Anthony paused. He was by now beginning to enjoy himself. George shifted uneasily. I remember, he murmured, such a large correspondence. The name, of course, being different, I could not be expected to know, and I may say George's voice PG 104 rose a little, firm in the assurance of moral stability, that I consider this masquerading as another man in the highest degree improper. I have no doubt whatever, that you have incurred a severe legal penalty. In this letter, continued Anthony, unmoved, Mr. Lomax made various suggestions concerning the manuscript in my charge. He also extended an invitation to me from Lord Caterham to join the house party here. Delighted to see you, my dear fellow, said that nobleman. Better late than never, eh? George frowned at him. Superintendent Battle bent an unmoved eye upon Anthony. And is that your explanation of your presence here last night, sir? He asked. Certainly not, said Anthony warmly. When I'm asked to stay at a country house, I don't scale the wall late at night, tramp across the park, and try the downstairs windows. I drive up to the front door, ring the bell, and wipe my feet on the mat. I will proceed. I replied to Mr. Lomax's letter, explaining that the manuscript had passed out of my keeping, and therefore regretfully declining Lord Caterham's kind invitation. But after I had done so, I remembered something which had up till then escaped my memory. He paused. The moment had come for skating over thin ice. I must tell you that in my struggle with the waiter Giuseppe, I had wrested from him a small bit of paper with some words scribbled on it. They had conveyed nothing to me at the time, but I still had them, and the mention of chimneys recalled them to me. I got the torn scrap out and looked at it. It was as I had thought. Here is the piece of paper, gentlemen, you can see for yourselves. The words on it are Chimneys 11:45 Thursday. Battle examined the paper attentively. Of course, continued Anthony, the word chimneys may have nothing whatever to do with this house. On the other hand, it may, and undoubtedly this Giuseppe PG 105 was a thieving rascal. I made up my mind to motor down here last night, satisfy myself that all was as it should be, put up at the inn, and call upon Lord Caterham in the morning and put him on his guard in case some mischief should be intended during the weekend. Quite so, said Lord Caterham encouragingly. Quite so. I was late in getting here, had not allowed enough time. Consequently, I stopped the car, climbed over the wall, and ran across the park. When I arrived on the terrace, the whole house was dark and silent. I was just turning away when I heard a shot. I fancied that it came from inside the house, and I ran back, crossed the terrace, and tried the windows. But they were fastened, and there was no sound of any kind from inside the house. I waited a while, but the whole place was still as the grave. So I made up my mind that I had made a mistake, and that what I had heard was a stray poacher. Quite a natural conclusion to come to under the circumstances, I think. Quite natural, said Superintendent Battle expressionlessly. I went on to the inn, put up as I said, and heard the news this morning. I realized, of course, that I was a suspicious character, bound to be under the circumstances, and came up here to tell my story, hoping it wasn't going to be handcuffs for one. There was a pause. Colonel Melrose looked sideways at Superintendent Battle. I think the story seems clear enough, he remarked. Yes, said Battle. I don't think we'll be handing out any handcuffs this morning. Any questions, Battle? There's one thing I'd like to know. What was this manuscript? He looked across at George, and the latter replied with a trace of unwillingness. The memoirs of the late Count Styletich. You see, you needn't say anything more, said Battle. I see perfectly. He turned to Anthony. Do you know who it was that was shot, Mr. Cade? At the Jolly Dog it was understood to be a Count Stanislaus or some such name. Tell him, said Battle laconically to George Lomax. George was clearly reluctant, but he was forced to speak. The gentleman who was staying here incognito as Count Stanislaus was His Highness Prince Michael of Herzoslovakia. Anthony whistled. That must be deuced awkward, he remarked. Superintendent Battle, who had been watching Anthony closely, gave a short grunt as though satisfied of something, and rose abruptly to his feet. There are one or two questions I'd like to ask Mr. Cade, he announced. I'll take him into the council chamber with me if I may. Certainly, certainly, said Lord Caterham. Take him anywhere you like. Anthony and the detective went out together. The body had been removed from the scene of the tragedy. There was a dark stain on the floor, where it had lain, but otherwise there was nothing to suggest that a tragedy had ever occurred. The sun poured in through the 3 windows, flooding the room with light, and bringing out the mellow tone of the old paneling. Anthony looked around him with approval. Very nice, he commented. Nothing much to beat old England, is there? Did it seem to you at first it was in this room the shot was fired? Asked the superintendent, not replying to Anthony's eulogium. Let me see. Anthony opened the window and went out on the terrace, looking up at the house. Yes, that's the room all right, he said. It's built out and occupies all the corner. If the shot had been fired anywhere else, it would have sounded from the left, but this was from behind me or to the right if anything. That's why I thought of poachers. It's at the extremity of the wing, you see. He stepped back across the threshold and asked suddenly, as though the idea had just struck him. But why do you ask? You know he was shot here, don't you? Ah, said the superintendent. We never know as much as we'd like to know. But, yes, he was shot here all right. Now you said something about trying the windows, didn't you? Yes. They were fastened from the inside. How many of them did you try? All 3 of them. Sure of that, sir? I'm in the habit of being sure. Why do you ask? That's a funny thing, said the superintendent. What's a funny thing? When the crime was discovered this morning, the middle one was open, not latched. That is to say. Phew, said Anthony, sinking down on the window seat and taking out his cigarette case. That's rather a blow. That opens up quite a different aspect of the case. It leaves us 2 alternatives. Either he was killed by someone in the house, and that someone unlatched the window after I had gone to make it look like an outside job, incidentally with me as Little Willie, or else, not to mince matters, I'm lying. I dare say you incline to the second possibility, but, upon my honor, you're wrong. Nobody's going to leave this house until I'm through with them. I can tell you that. said Superintendent Battle grimly. Anthony looked at him keenly. How long have you had the idea that it may be an inside job? He asked. Battle smiled. I've had a notion that way all along. Your trail was a bit too flaring, if I may put it that way. As soon as your boots fitted the footmarks, I began to have my doubts. I congratulate Scotland Yard, said Anthony lightly. But at that moment, the moment when Battle apparently admitted Anthony's complete absence of complicity in the crime, Anthony felt more than ever the need of being upon his guard. Superintendent Battle was a very astute officer. It would not do to make any slip with Superintendent Battle about. That's where it happened, I suppose, said Anthony, nodding towards the dark patch upon the floor. Yes. What was he shot with? A revolver? Yes, but we shan't know what make until they get the bullet out at the autopsy. It wasn't found, then? No, it wasn't found. No clues of any kind? Well, we've got this. Rather after the manner of a conjurer, Superintendent Battle produced a half-sheet of notepaper, and as he did so, he again watched Anthony closely without seeming to do so. But Anthony recognized the design upon it without any sign of consternation. Aha! Comrades of the Red Hand again. If they are going to scatter this sort of thing about, they ought to have it lithographed. It must be a frightful nuisance doing every one separately. Where was this found? Underneath the body. You've seen it before, sir? Anthony recounted to him in detail his short encounter with that public-spirited association. The idea is, I suppose, that the comrades did him in. Do you think it likely, sir? Well, it would be in keeping with their propaganda. But I've always found that those who talk most about blood have never actually seen it run. I shouldn't have said the comrades had the guts myself. And they're such picturesque people, too. I don't see one of them disguising himself as a suitable guest for a country house. Still, one never knows. Quite right, Mr. Cade. One never knows. Anthony looked suddenly amused. I see the big idea now. Open window, trail of footprints, suspicious stranger at village inn. But I can assure you, my dear superintendent, that, whatever I am not the local agent of the Red Hand. Superintendent Battle smiled a little. Then he played his last card. Would you have any objection to seeing the body? He shot out suddenly. None whatever, rejoined Anthony. Battle took a key from his pocket, and preceding Anthony down the corridor, paused at a door and unlocked it. It was one of the smaller drawing rooms. The body lay on a table covered with a sheet. Superintendent Battle waited until Anthony was beside him, and then whisked away the sheet suddenly. An eager light sprang into his eyes at the half-uttered exclamation and the start of surprise which the other gave. So you do recognize him, Mr. Cade, he said, in a voice that he strove to render devoid of triumph. I've seen him before, yes, said Anthony, recovering himself. But not as Prince Michael Abalovich. He purported to come from Messrs. Balderson and Hodgkins, and he called himself Mr. Chapter 13. The American Visitor. Superintendent Battle replaced the sheet with a slightly crestfallen air of a man whose best point has fallen flat. Anthony stood with his hands in his pockets, lost in thought. So that's what old Lollipop meant when he talked about other means, he murmured at last. I beg your pardon, Mr. Cade. Nothing, Superintendent. Forgive my abstraction. You see, or rather my friend, Jimmy McGrath, has been very neatly done out of £1,000. £1,000 is a nice sum of money, said Battle. It isn't £1,000 so much, said Anthony, though I agree with you that it's a nice sum of money. It's being done that maddens me. I handed over that manuscript like a little woolly lamb. It hurts, Superintendent, truly it hurts. The detective said nothing. Well, said Anthony, regrets are vain, and all may not yet be lost. I've only got to get hold of dear old Styletitch's reminiscences between now and next Wednesday, and all will be gas and gaiters. Would you mind coming back to the council chamber, Mr. Cade? There's one little thing I want to point out to you. Back in the council chamber, the detective strode over at once to the middle window. I've been thinking, Mr. Cade, this particular window PG 111 is very stiff truly. You may have been mistaken in thinking that it was fastened. It may just have stuck. I'm sure, yes, I'm almost sure, that you were mistaken. Anthony eyed him keenly. And supposing I say that I'm quite sure I was not, don't you think you could have been? Said Battle, looking at him very steadily. Well, to oblige you, Superintendent, yes. Battle smiled in a satisfied fashion. You're quick in the uptake, sir, and you'll have no objection to saying so, careless-like, at a suitable moment? None whatever. He paused, as Battle gripped his arm. The superintendent was bent forward, listening, enjoining silence on Anthony with a gesture. He tiptoed noiselessly to the door and flung it suddenly open. On the threshold stood a tall man with black hair neatly parted in the middle, china blue eyes with a particularly innocent expression, and a large placid face. Your pardon, gentlemen, he said in a slow drawling voice with a pronounced transatlantic accent. But is it permitted to inspect the scene of the crime? I take it that you are both gentlemen from Scotland Yard. I have not that honor, said Anthony, but this gentleman is Superintendent Battle of Scotland Yard. Is that so? Said the American gentleman with a great appearance of interest. Pleased to meet you, sir. My name is Hiram P. Fish of New York City. What was it you wanted to see, Mr. Fish? Asked the detective. The American walked gently into the room and looked with much interest at the dark patch on the floor. I am interested in crime, Mr. Battle. It is one of my hobbies. I have contributed a monograph to one of our weekly periodicals on the subject degeneracy and the criminal. As he spoke, his eyes went gently round the room, seeming to note everything in it. They rested just a shade longer on the window. The body, said Superintendent Battle, stating the self-evident fact, has been removed. Surely, said Mr. Fish. His eyes went onto the paneled walls. Some remarkable pictures in this room, gentlemen. A Holbein, 2 Van Dycks, and, if I am not mistaken, a Velasquez. I am interested in pictures and likewise in first editions. It was to see his first editions that Lord Caterham was so kind as to invite me down here. He sighed gently. I guess that's all off now. It would show a proper feeling, I suppose, for the guests to return to town immediately. I'm afraid that can't be done, sir, said Superintendent Battle. Nobody must leave the house until after the inquest. Is that so? And when is the inquest? May be tomorrow, may not be until Monday. We've got to arrange for the autopsy and see the coroner. I get you, said Mr. Fish. Under the circumstances, though, it will be a melancholy party. Battle led the way to the door. We'd best get out of here, he said. We're keeping it locked still. He waited for the other two to pass through, and then turned the key and removed it. I opine, said Mr. Fish, that you are seeking for fingerprints. Maybe, said the superintendent laconically. I should say to that, on a night such as last night, an intruder would have left footprints on the hardwood floor. None inside, plenty outside. Mine, explained Anthony cheerfully. The innocent eyes of Mr. Fish swept over him. Young man, he said, you surprise me. They turned a corner and came out into the big wide hall, paneled like the council chamber in old oak and with a wide gallery above it. 2 other figures came into sight at the far end. Aha, said Mr. Fish, our genial host. This was such a ludicrous description of Lord Caterham that Anthony had to turn his head away to conceal a smile. And with him, continued the American, is a lady whose name I did not catch last night. But she is bright, she is very bright. With Lord Caterham was Virginia Revel. Anthony had been anticipating this meeting all along. He had no idea how to act. He must leave it to Virginia. Although he had full confidence in her presence of mind, he had not the slightest idea what line she would take. He was not long left in doubt. "Why, it's Mr. Cade," said Virginia. She held out both hands to him. "So you found you could come down after all, my dear Mrs. Revel. I had no idea Mr. Cade was a friend of yours," said Lord Caterham. "He's a very old friend," said Virginia, smiling at Anthony with a mischievous glint in her eye. "I ran across him in London unexpectedly yesterday, and told him I was coming down here." Anthony was quick to give her pointer. "I explained to Mrs. Revel," he said, "that I had been forced to refuse your kind invitation, since it had really been extended to quite a different man, and I couldn't very well foist a perfect stranger on you under false pretenses." "Well, well, my dear fellow," said Lord Caterham, "that's all over and done with now. I'll send down to the cricketers for your bag." "It's very kind of you, Lord Caterham, but—" "Nonsense, of course you must come to Chimneys. PG 114 horrible place, the cricketers, to stay in, I mean." "Of course you must come, Mr. Cade," said Virginia softly. Anthony realized the altered tone of his surroundings. Already Virginia had done much for him. He was no longer an ambiguous stranger. Her position was so assured and unassailable that anyone for whom she vouched was accepted as a matter of course. He thought of the pistol in the tree at Burnham Beeches and smiled inwardly. "I'll send for your traps," said Lord Caterham to Anthony. "I suppose, in the circumstances, we can't have any shooting. A pity, but there it is. And I don't know what the devil to do with Isoc Stein. It's all very unfortunate." The depressed peer sighed heavily. "That's settled, then," said Virginia. "You can begin to be useful right away, Mr. Cade, and take me out on the lake. It's very peaceful there and far from crime and all that sort of thing. Isn't it awful for poor Lord Caterham having a murder done in his house? But it's George's fault really. This is George's party, you know." "Ah," said Lord Caterham, "but I should never have listened to him." He assumed the air of a strong man betrayed by a single weakness. "One can't help listening to George," said Virginia. "He always holds you so that you can't get away. I'm thinking of patenting a detachable lapel." "I wish you would," chuckled her host. "I'm glad you're coming to us, Cade. I need support." "I appreciate your kindness very much, Lord Caterham," said Anthony. "Especially," he added, "when I'm such a suspicious character. But my staying here makes it easier for battle." "In what way, sir?" asked the superintendent. "It won't be so difficult to keep an eye on me," explained Anthony gently. Chapter 14, mainly political and financial, except for that involuntary twitch of the eyelids. Superintendent Battle's impassivity was unimpaired. If he had been surprised at Virginia's recognition of Anthony, he did not show it. He and Lord Caterham stood together and watched those two go out through the garden door. Mr. Fish also watched them. "Nice young fellow, that," said Lord Caterham. "Very nice for Mrs. Revel to meet an old friend," murmured the American. "They have been acquainted some time, presumably." "Seems so," said Lord Caterham, "but I've never heard her mention him before. Oh, by the way, Battle, Mr. Lomax has been asking for you. He's in the blue morning room." "Very good, Lord Caterham. I'll go there at once." Battle found his way to the blue morning room without difficulty. He was already familiar with the geography of the house. "Ah, there you are, Battle," said Lomax. He was striding impatiently up and down the carpet. There was one other person in the room, a big man sitting in a chair by the fireplace. He was dressed in very correct English shooting clothes, which nevertheless sat strangely upon him. He had a fat yellow face and black eyes as impenetrable as those of a cobra. There was a generous curve to the big nose and power in the square lines of the vast jaw. "Come in, Battle," said Lomax irritably, "and shut the PG 117 door behind you. This is Mr. Herman Isoc Stein." Battle inclined his head respectfully. He knew all about Mr. Herman Isoc Stein, and though the great financier sat there silent, whilst Lomax strode up and down and talked. He knew who was the real power in the room. "We can speak more freely now," said Lomax. "Before Lord Caterham and Colonel Melrose, I was anxious not to say too much. You understand, Battle? These things mustn't get about." "Ah," said Battle, "but they always do, more's the pity." Just for a second he saw a trace of a smile on the fat yellow face. It disappeared as suddenly as it had come. "Now what do you really think of this young fellow, this Anthony Cade?" continued George. "Do you still assume him to be innocent?" Battle shrugged his shoulders very slightly. "He tells a straight story. Part of it we shall be able to verify. On the face of it, it accounts for his presence here last night. I shall cable to South Africa, of course, for information about his antecedents." "Then you regard him as cleared of all complicity?" Battle raised a large square hand. "Not so fast, sir. I never said that." "What is your own idea about the crime, Superintendent Battle?" asked Isaacstein, speaking for the first time. His voice was deep and rich, and had a certain compelling quality about it. It had stood him in good stead at board meetings in his younger days. "It's rather too soon to have ideas, Mr. Isaacstein. I've not got beyond asking myself the first question." "What is that?" "Oh, it's always the same. Motive. Who benefits by the death of Prince Michael?" "We've got to answer that before we can get anywhere." "The Revolutionary Party of Czechoslovakia," began George. Superintendent Battle waved him aside with something less than his usual respect. "It wasn't the comrades of the Red Hand, sir, if you're thinking of them, but the paper, with the Scarlet Hand on it, put there to suggest the obvious solution." George's dignity was a little ruffled. "Really, Battle, I don't see how you can be so sure of that." "Bless you, Mr. Lomax, we know all about the comrades of the Red Hand. We've had our eye on them ever since Prince Michael landed in England. That sort of thing is the elementary work of the department. They'd never be allowed to get within a mile of him." "I agree with Superintendent Battle," said Isaacstein. "We must look elsewhere. You see, sir," said Battle, encouraged by his support, "we do know a little about the case. If we don't know who gains by his death, we do know who loses by it." "Meaning?" said Isaacstein. His black eyes were bent upon the detective. More than ever, he reminded Battle of a hooded cobra. "You and Mr. Lomax, not to mention the Loyalist Party of Czechoslovakia. If you'll pardon the expression, sir, you're in the soup." "Really, Battle," interposed George, shocked to the core. "Go on." "Battle," said Isaacstein, "in the soup describes the situation very accurately. You're an intelligent man. You've got to have a king. You've lost your king, like that." He snapped his large fingers. "You've got to find another in a hurry, and that's not an easy job. No, I don't want to know the details of your scheme. The bare outline is enough for me. But, I take it's a big deal." Isaacstein bent his head slowly. "It's a very big deal. That brings me to my second question. Who is the next heir to the throne of Czechoslovakia?" Isaacstein looked across at Lomax. The latter answered the question with a certain reluctance and a good deal of hesitation. "That would be, I should say, yes, in all probability Prince Nicholas would be the next heir." "Ah," said Battle, "and who is Prince Nicholas?" "A first cousin of Prince Michael's." "Ah," said Battle, "I should like to hear all about Prince Nicholas, especially where he is at present." "Nothing much is known of him," said Lomax. "As a young man, he was most peculiar in his ideas, consorted with socialists and republicans, and acted in a way highly unbecoming to his position. He was sent down from Oxford, I believe, for some wild escapade. There was a rumor of his death 2 years later in the Congo, but it was only a rumor. He turned up a few months ago when news of the royalist reaction got about." "Truly," said Battle. "Where did he turn up?" "In America." "America." Battle turned to Isaacstein with one laconic word. "Oil." The financier nodded. He represented that if the Czechoslovakians chose a king, they would prefer him to Prince Michael as being more in sympathy with modern enlightened ideas, and he drew attention to his early democratic views and his sympathy with republican ideals. In return for financial support, he was prepared to grant concessions to a certain group of American financiers. Superintendent Battle so far forgot his habitual impassivity as to give vent to a prolonged whistle. "So that is it," he muttered. In the meantime, the Loyalist Party supported Prince Michael, and you felt sure you'd come out on top. And then this happens. "You surely don't think," began George. "It was a big deal," said Battle. "Mr. Isaacstein says PG 120 so, and I should say that what he calls a big deal is a big deal. There are always unscrupulous tools to be got hold of," said Isaacstein quietly. "For the moment, Wall Street wins, but they've not done with me yet. Find out who killed Prince Michael, Superintendent Battle, if you want to do your country a service." "One thing strikes me as highly suspicious," put in George. "Why did the equerry, Captain Andressy, not come down with the prince yesterday?" "I've inquired into that," said Battle. "It's perfectly simple. He stayed in town to make arrangements with a certain lady, on behalf of Prince Michael, for next weekend." The Baron rather frowned on such things, thinking them injudicious at the present stage of affairs, so His Highness had to go about them in a hole and corner manner. He was, if I may say so, inclined to be a rather, dissipated young man. "I'm afraid so," said George ponderously. "Yes, I'm afraid so. There's one other point we ought to take into account, I think," said Battle, speaking with a certain amount of hesitation. "King Victor's supposed to be in England." "King Victor?" Lomax frowned in an effort at recollection. "Notorious French crook, sir. We've had a warning from the Esrat in Paris." "Of course," said George. "I remember now. Jewel thief, isn't he? Why, that's the man," he broke off abruptly. Isaacstein, who had been frowning abstractedly at the fireplace, looked up just too late to catch the warning glance telegraphed from Superintendent Battle to the other. But being a man sensitive to vibrations in the atmosphere, he was conscious of a sense of strain. "You don't want me any longer, do you, Lomax?" he inquired. "No, thank you, my dear fellow. Would it upset your plans if I returned to London, Superintendent Battle?" "I'm afraid so, sir," said the superintendent civilly. "You see, if you go, there will be others who will want to go also, and that would never do." "Quite so." The great financier left the room, closing the door behind him. "Splendid fellow, Isaacstein," murmured George Lomax perfunctorily. "Very powerful personality," agreed Superintendent Battle. George began to pace up and down again. "What you say disturbs me greatly," he began. "King Victor, I thought he was in prison? Came out a few months ago. French police meant to keep on his heels, but he managed to give them the slip straight away. He would too. One of the coolest customers that ever lived. For some reason or other, they believe he's in England and have notified us to that effect. But what should he be doing in England?" "That's for you to say, sir," said Battle significantly. You think, you know the story, of course." "Ah, yes, I can see you do. I was not in office, of course, at the time, but I heard the whole story from the late Lord Caterham. An unparalleled catastrophe. The Koh-i-Noor," said Battle reflectively. "Hush, Battle." George glanced suspiciously round him. "I beg of you, mention no names. Much better not. If you must speak of it, call it the K." The superintendent looked wooden again. "You don't connect King Victor with this crime, do you, Battle? It's just a possibility, that's all. If you'll cast your mind back, sir, you'll remember that there were 4 PG 122 places where a certain royal visitor may have concealed the jewel. Chimneys was one of them. King Victor was arrested in Paris 3 days after the disappearance, if I may call it that, of the K. It was always hoped that he would some day lead us to the jewel, but Chimneys has been ransacked and overhauled a dozen times." "Yes," said Battle sapiently, "but it's never much good looking when you don't know where to look." Only suppose now that this King Victor came here to look for the thing, was surprised by Prince Michael, and shot him. It's possible, said George, a most likely solution of the crime. I wouldn't go as far as that. It's possible, but not much more. Why is that? Because King Victor has never been known to take a life, said Battle seriously. Oh, but a man like that, a dangerous criminal. But Battle shook his head in a dissatisfied manner. Criminals always act true to type, Mr. Lomax. It's surprising. All the same. Yes, I'd rather like to question the prince's servant. I've left him purposely to the last. We'll have him in here, sir, if you don't mind. George signified his assent. The superintendent rang the bell. Treadwell answered it, and departed with his instructions. He returned shortly accompanied by a tall fair man with high cheekbones, and very deep-set blue eyes, and an impassivity of countenance which almost rivaled Battle's. Boris Anshakoff. Yes, you were valet to Prince Michael? I was His Highness's valet, yes. The man spoke good English, though with a markedly harsh foreign accent. You know that your master was murdered last night? A deep snarl, like the snarl of a wild beast, was the man's only answer. It alarmed George, who withdrew prudently towards the window. When did you see your master last? His Highness retired to bed at 10:30. I slept, as always, in the anteroom next to him. He must have gone down to the room downstairs by the other door, the door that gave onto the corridor. I did not hear him go. It may be that I was drugged. I have been an unfaithful servant. I slept while my master woke. I am accursed. George gazed at him, fascinated. You loved your master, eh? Said Battle, watching the man closely. Boris's features contracted painfully. He swallowed twice. Then his voice came, harsh with emotion. I say this to you, English policeman, I would have died for him. And since he is dead, and I still live, my eyes shall not know sleep, or my heart rest, until I have avenged him. Like a dog will I nose out his murderer, and when I have discovered him, ah. His eyes lit up. Suddenly he drew an immense knife from beneath his coat, and brandished it aloft. Not all at once will I kill him. Oh, no. First I will slit his nose, and cut off his ears, and put out his eyes, and then, into his black heart I will thrust this knife. Swiftly he replaced the knife, and turning, left the room. George Lomax, his eyes always protuberant, but now goggling almost out of his head, stared at the closed door. Purebred Czechoslovakian, of course, he muttered. Most uncivilized people. A race of brigands. Superintendent Battle rose alertly to his feet. Either that man's sincere, he remarked, or he's the best bluffer I've ever seen. Chapter 15. The French Stranger. Virginia and Anthony walked side by side down the path, which led to the lake. For some minutes after leaving the house they were silent. It was Virginia who broke the silence at last with a little laugh. Oh, dear, she said, isn't it dreadful? Here I am so bursting with the things I want to tell you, and the things I want to know, that I simply don't know where to begin. First of all, she lowered her voice. What have you done with the body? How awful it sounds, doesn't it? I never dreamt that I should be so steeped in crime. I suppose it's quite a novel sensation for you, agreed Anthony. But not for you? Well, I've never disposed of a corpse before, certainly. Tell me about it. Briefly and succinctly, Anthony ran over the steps he had taken on the previous night. Virginia listened attentively. I think you were very clever, she said approvingly when he had finished. I can pick up the trunk again when I go back to Paddington. The only difficulty that may arise is if you had to give an account of where you were yesterday evening. I can't see that that can arise. The body can't have been found until late last night, or possibly this morning. Otherwise there would have been something about it in this morning's papers. And whatever you may PG 126 gin from reading detective stories, doctors aren't such magicians that they can tell you exactly how many hours a man has been dead. The exact time of his death will be pretty vague. An alibi for last night would be far more to the point. I know, Lord Caterham was telling me all about it, but the Scotland Yard man is quite convinced of your innocence now, isn't he?" Anthony did not reply at once. "He doesn't look particularly astute," continued Virginia. "I don't know about that," said Anthony slowly. "I've an impression that there are no flies on Superintendent Battle. He appears to be convinced of my innocence, but I'm not so sure. He's stumped at present by my apparent lack of motive." "Apparent?" cried Virginia. "But what possible reason could you have for murdering an unknown foreign count?" Anthony darted a sharp glance at her. "You were at one time or other in Czechoslovakia, weren't you?" he asked. "Yes, I was there with my husband for 2 years at the embassy. That was just before the assassination of the king and queen." "Did you ever run across Prince Michael Abalovich?" "Michael? Of course I did. Horrid little wretch," he suggested. "I remember that I should marry him morganatically." "Did he really? And what did he suggest you should do about your existing husband?" "Oh, he had a sort of David and Uriah scheme all made out." "And how did you respond to this amiable offer?" "Well," said Virginia, "unfortunately one had to be diplomatic. So poor little Michael didn't get it as straight from the shoulder as he may have done. But he retired. PG 127 hurt all the same." "Why all this interest about Michael?" "Something I'm getting at in my own blundering fashion. I take it that you didn't meet the murdered man?" "No, to put it like a book, he retired to his own apartments immediately on arrival." "And of course you haven't seen the body?" Virginia, eyeing him with a good deal of interest, shook her head. "Could you get to see it, do you think?" "By means of influence in high places, meaning Lord Caterham, I dare say I could." "Why? Is it an order?" "Good Lord, no," said Anthony, horrified. "Have I been as dictatorial as all that?" "No, it's simply this. Count Stanislaus was the incognito of Prince Michael of Czechoslovakia." Virginia's eyes opened very wide. "I see." Suddenly her face broke into its fascinating one-sided smile. "I hope you don't suggest that Michael went to his rooms simply to avoid seeing me." "Something of the kind," admitted Anthony. "You see, if I'm right in my idea that someone wanted to prevent your coming to Chimneys, the reason seems to lie in your knowing Czechoslovakia. Do you realize that you're the only person here who knew Prince Michael by sight?" "Do you mean that this man who was murdered was an impostor?" asked Virginia abruptly. "That is the possibility that crossed my mind. If you can get Lord Caterham to show you the body, we can clear up that point at once." "He was shot at 11:45, said Virginia thoughtfully. "The time mentioned on that scrap of paper. The whole thing's horribly mysterious. That reminds me, is that your window up there? The second from the end over the council chamber?" "No, my room is in the Elizabethan wing, the other side." "Why?" "Simply because as I walked away last night, after PG 128 thinking I heard a shot, the light went up in that room." "How curious. I don't know who has that room, but I can find out by asking Bundle. Perhaps they heard the shot. If so, they haven't come forward to say so. I understood from Battle that nobody in the house heard the shot fired. It's the only clue of any kind that I've got, and I dare say it's a pretty rotten one, but I mean to follow it up for what it's worth." "It's curious, certainly," said Virginia thoughtfully. They had arrived at the boathouse by the lake, and had been leaning against it as they talked. "And now for the whole story," said Anthony. "We'll paddle gently about on the lake, secure from the prying ears of Scotland Yard, American visitors, and curious housemaids." "I've heard something from Lord Caterham," said Virginia, "but not nearly enough. To begin with, which are you really, Anthony Cade or Jimmy McGrath?" For the second time, that morning, Anthony unfolded the history of the last 6 weeks of his life, with this difference that the account given to Virginia needed no editing. He finished up with his own astonished recognition of Mr. Holmes. "By the way, Mrs. Revel," he ended, "I've never thanked you for imperiling your immortal soul by saying that I was an old friend of yours." "Of course you're an old friend," cried Virginia. "You don't suppose I'd cumber you with a corpse, and then pretend you were a mere acquaintance next time I met you?" No, truly, she paused. Do you know one thing that strikes me about all this? She went on, that there's some extra mystery about those memoirs that we haven't fathomed yet. I think you're right, agreed Anthony. There's one thing I'd like you to tell me, he continued. What's that? Why did you seem so surprised when I mentioned the name of Jimmy McGrath to you yesterday at Pont Street? Had you heard it before? I had. Sherlock Holmes. George, my cousin, George Lomax, you know, came to see me the other day and suggested a lot of frightfully silly things. His idea was that I should come down here and make myself agreeable to this man McGrath and Delilah the memoirs out of him somehow. He didn't put it like that, of course. He talked a lot of nonsense about English gentlewomen and things like that, but his real meaning was never obscure for a moment. It was just the sort of rotten thing poor old George would think of. And then I wanted to know too much, and he tried to put me off with lies that wouldn't have deceived a child of 2. Well, his plan seems to have succeeded. Anyhow, observed Anthony, here am I, the James McGrath he had in mind, and here are you being agreeable to me. But, alas, for poor old George, no memoirs. Now I've got a question for you. When I said I hadn't written those letters, you said you knew I hadn't. You couldn't know any such thing? Oh, yes, I could, said Anthony, smiling. I've got a good working knowledge of psychology. You mean your belief in the sterling worth of my moral character was such that, but Anthony was shaking his head vigorously. Not at all. I don't know anything about your moral character. You may have a lover, and you may write to him, but you'd never lie down to be blackmailed. The Virginia Revel of those letters was scared stiff. You'd have fought. I wonder who the real Virginia Revel is, where she is, I mean. It makes me feel as though I had a double somewhere. Anthony lit a cigarette. You know that one of the letters was written from Chimneys? He asked at last. What? Virginia was clearly startled. When was it written? It wasn't dated. But it's odd, isn't it? I'm perfectly certain no other Virginia Revel has ever stayed at Chimneys. Bundle or Lord Caterham would have said something about the coincidence of the name if she had. Yes, it's rather queer. Do you know, Mrs. Revel, I am beginning to disbelieve profoundly in this other Virginia Revel. She's very elusive, agreed Virginia, extraordinarily elusive. I am beginning to think that the person who wrote those letters deliberately used your name. But why? Cried Virginia. Why should they do such a thing? Ah, that's just the question. There's the devil of a lot to find out about everything. Who do you really think killed Michael? Asked Virginia suddenly. The comrades of the Red Hand? I suppose they may have done so, said Anthony in a dissatisfied voice. Pointless killing would be rather characteristic of them. Let's get to work, said Virginia. I see Lord Caterham and Bundle strolling together. The first thing to do is to find out definitely whether the dead man is Michael or not. Anthony paddled to shore, and a few moments later they had joined Lord Caterham and his daughter. Lunch is late, said his lordship in a depressed voice. Battle has insulted the cook, I expect. This is a friend of mine, Bundle, said Virginia. Be nice to him. Bundle looked earnestly at Anthony for some minutes, and then addressed a remark to Virginia as though he had not been there. Where do you pick up these nice-looking men, Virginia? How do you do it? Says she enviously. You can have him, said Virginia generously. I want Lord Caterham. She smiled upon the flattered peer, slipped her hand through his arm, and they moved off together. Do you talk? Asked Bundle. Or are you just strong and silent? Talk, said Anthony. I babble, I murmur, I gurgle, like the running brook, you know. Sometimes I evening ask questions. As for instance, who occupies the second room on the left from the end? He pointed to it as he spoke. What an extraordinary question, said Bundle. You intrigue me greatly. Let me see. Yes, that's Mademoiselle Brun's room, the French governess. She endeavors to keep my young sisters in order. Dulcie and Daisy, like the song, you know. I dare say they'd have called the next one Dorothy May. But mother got tired of having nothing but girls and died. Thought someone else could take on the job of providing an heir. Mademoiselle Brunn, said Anthony thoughtfully. How long has she been with you? 2 months. She came to us when we were in Scotland. Ha, said Anthony. I smell a rat. I wish I could smell some lunch, said Bundle. Do I ask the Scotland Yard man to have lunch with us, Mr. Cade? You're a man of the world, you know about the etiquette of such things. We've never had a murder in the house before. Exciting, isn't it? I'm sorry your character was so completely cleared this morning. I've always wanted to meet a murderer and see for myself if they're as genial and charming as the Sunday papers always say they are. God, what's that? What seemed to be a taxi approaching the house. Its two occupants were a tall man with a bald head and a black beard, and a smaller and younger man with a PG 132 black mustache. Anthony recognized the former and guessed that it was he, rather than the vehicle which contained him, that had wrung the exclamation of astonishment from his companion's lips. Unless I much mistake, he remarked, that is my old friend, Baron Lollipop. Baron what? I call him Lollipop for convenience. The pronouncing of his own name tends to harden the arteries. It nearly wrecked the telephone this morning, remarked Bundle. So that's the Baron, is it? I foresee he'll be turned on to me this afternoon, and I've had Isochstein all the morning. Let George do his own dirty work, say I, and to hell with politics. Excuse me leaving you, Mr. Cade, but I must stand by poor old father. Bundle retreated rapidly to the house. Anthony stood looking after her for a minute or two and thoughtfully lighted a cigarette. As he did so, his ear was caught by a stealthy sound quite near him. He was standing by the boathouse, and the sound seemed to come from just round the corner. The mental picture conveyed to him was that of a man vainly trying to stifle a sudden sneeze. Now I very much wonder who's behind the boathouse, said Anthony to himself. We'd better see, I think. Suiting the action to the word, he threw away the match he had just blown out and ran lightly and noiselessly round the corner of the boathouse. He came upon a man who had evidently been kneeling on the ground and was just struggling to rise to his feet. He was tall, wore a light-colored overcoat and glasses, and for the rest, had a short-pointed black beard and a slightly foppish manner. He was between 30 and 40 years of age, and altogether of a most respectable appearance. "What are you doing here?" asked Anthony. He was pretty certain that the man was not one of Lord Caterham's guests. "I ask your pardon," said the stranger, with a marked foreign accent and what was meant to be an engaging smile. "It is that I wish to return to the Jolly Crickets, and I have lost my way. Would monsieur be so good as to direct me?" "Certainly," said Anthony, "but you don't go there by water, you know." "Eh?" said the stranger, with the air of one at a loss. "I said," repeated Anthony, with a meaning glance at the boathouse, "that you won't get there by water. There's a right of way across the park, some distance away, but all this is the private part. You're trespassing." "I am most sorry," said the stranger. "I lost my direction entirely. I thought I would come up here and inquire." Anthony refrained from pointing out that kneeling behind a boathouse was a somewhat peculiar manner of prosecuting inquiries. He took the stranger kindly by the arm. "You go this way," he said. "Right round the lake and straight on. You can't miss the path. When you get on it, turn to the left and it will lead you to the village. You're staying at the Cricketers, I suppose?" "I am, monsieur, since this morning. Many thanks for your kindness in directing me." "Don't mention it," said Anthony. "I hope you haven't caught cold." "Eh?" said the stranger. "From kneeling on the damp ground, I mean," explained Anthony. "I fancied I heard you sneezing." "I may have sneezed," admitted the other. "Quite so," said Anthony. "But you shouldn't suppress a sneeze, you know. One of the most eminent doctors said so only the other day. It's frightfully dangerous. I don't remember exactly what it does to you, whether PG 134 it's an inhibition or whether it hardens your arteries, but you must never do it. Good morning, and thank you, monsieur, for setting me on the right road. Second suspicious stranger from village inn, murmured Anthony to himself as he watched the other's retreating form, and one that I can't quite place either, appearance that of a French commercial traveler. I don't quite see him as a comrade of the Red Hand. Does he represent yet a third party in the harassed state of Czechoslovakia? The French governess has the second window from the end. A mysterious Frenchman is found slinking round the grounds, listening to conversations that are not meant for his ears. I'll bet my hat there's something in it. Musing thus, Anthony retraced his steps to the house. On the terrace he encountered Lord Caterham, looking suitably depressed, and two new arrivals. He brightened a little at the sight of Anthony. "Ah, there you are," he remarked. "Let me introduce you to Baron, and Captain Andrassy. Mr. Anthony Cade." The Baron stared at Anthony with growing suspicion. "Mr. Cade?" he said stiffly. "I think not. A word alone with you, Baron," said Anthony. "I can explain everything." The Baron bowed, and the two men walked down the terrace together. "Baron," said Anthony, "I must throw myself upon your mercy. I have so far strained the honor of an English gentleman as to travel to this country under an assumed name. I represented myself to you as Mr. James McGrath, but you must see for yourself that the deception involved was infinitesimal. You are doubtless acquainted with the works of Shakespeare, and his remarks about the unimportance of the nomenclature of roses. This case is the same. The man you wanted to see was the man in possession of the memoirs. I was that man. As you know PG 135 only too well, I am no longer in possession of them. A neat trick, Baron, a very neat trick. Who thought of it, you or your principal? His Highness's own idea it was, and for anyone but him to carry it out he would not permit. He did it jolly well, said Anthony, with approval. I never took him for anything but an Englishman. The education of an English gentleman did the prince receive, explained the Baron. The custom of Czechoslovakia it is. No professional could have pinched those papers better, said Anthony. May I ask, without indiscretion, what has become of them? Between gentlemen, began the Baron. You are too kind, Baron, murmured Anthony. I've never been called a gentleman so often as I have in the last 48 hours. I to you say this, I believe them to be burnt. You believe, but you don't know, eh? Is that it? His Highness in his own keeping retained them. His purpose it was to read them and then by the fire to destroy them. I see, said Anthony. All the same, they are not the kind of light literature you'd skim through in half an hour. Among the effects of my martyred master they have not discovered been. It is clear, therefore, that burnt they are. Said Anthony. I wonder. He was silent for a minute or two and then went on. I have asked you these questions, Baron, because, as you may have heard, I myself have been implicated in the crime. I must clear myself absolutely, so that no suspicion attaches to me. Undoubtedly, said the Baron. Your honor demands it. Exactly, said Anthony. You put these things so well. I haven't got the knack of it. To continue, I can PG 136 only clear myself by discovering the real murderer, and to do that I must of all the facts. This question of the memoirs is very important. It seems to me possible that to gain possession of them may be the motive of the crime. Tell me, Baron, is that a very far-fetched idea? The Baron hesitated for a moment or two. You yourself the memoirs have read? He asked cautiously at length. I think I am answered, said Anthony, smiling. Now, Baron, there's just one thing more. I should like to give you fair warning that it is still my intention to deliver that manuscript to the publishers on Wednesday next, the 13th of October. The Baron stared at him. But you have no longer got it? On Wednesday next, I said. Today is Friday. That gives me 5 days to get hold of it again. But if it is burnt, I don't think it is burnt. I have good reasons for not believing so. As he spoke they turned the corner of the terrace. A massive figure was advancing towards them. Anthony, who had not yet seen the great Mr. Hermann Isaacstein, looked at him with considerable interest. "Ah, Baron," said Isaacstein, waving the big black cigar he was smoking, "this is a bad business, a very bad business." "My good friend, Mr. Isaacstein, it is truly," cried the Baron. "All our noble edifice in ruins is." Anthony tactfully left the two gentlemen to their lamentations and retraced his steps along the terrace. Suddenly he came to a halt. A thin spiral of smoke was rising into the air apparently from the very center of the yew hedge. "It must be hollow in the middle," reflected Anthony. "I've heard of such things before." He looked swiftly to right and left of him. Lord Caterham was at the farther end of the terrace with Captain PG 137 Andrassy. Their backs were towards him. Anthony bent down and wriggled his way through the massive yew. He had been quite right in his supposition. The yew hedge was really not one, but two. A narrow passage divided them. The entrance to this was about halfway up on the side of the house. There was no mystery about it, but no one seeing the yew hedge from the front would have guessed at the probability. Anthony looked down the narrow vista. About halfway down, a man was reclining in a basket chair. A half-smoked cigar rested on the arm of the chair, and the gentleman himself appeared to be asleep. "Ahem," said Anthony to himself. "Evidently Mr. Chapter 16. Tea in the schoolroom. Anthony regained the terrace with the feeling uppermost in his mind that the only safe place for private conversations was the middle of the lake. The resonant boom of a gong sounded from the house, and Treadwell appeared in a stately fashion from a side door. "Luncheon is served, my lord." "Ah," said Lord Caterham, brisking up a little. "Lunch." At that moment 2 children burst out of the house. They were high-spirited young women of 12 and 10, and though their names may be Dulcie and Daisy, as Bundle had affirmed, they appeared to be more generally known as Guggle and Winkle. They executed a kind of war dance, interspersed with shrill whoops till Bundle emerged and quelled them. "Where's Mademoiselle?" she demanded. "She's got the migraine, the migraine, the migraine," chanted Winkle. "Hurrah!" said Guggle, joining in. Lord Caterham had succeeded in shepherding most of his guests into the house. Now he laid a restraining hand on Anthony's arm. "Come to my study," he breathed. "I've got something rather special there." Slinking down the hall, far more like a thief than like the master of the house, Lord Caterham gained the shelter PG 139 of his sanctum. Here he unlocked a cupboard and produced various bottles. "Talking to foreigners always makes me so thirsty," he explained apologetically. "I don't know why it is." There was a knock on the door, and Virginia popped her head round the corner of it. "Got a special cocktail for me?" she demanded. "Of course," said Lord Caterham hospitably. "Come in." The next few minutes were taken up with serious rites. "I needed that," said Lord Caterham with a sigh as he replaced his glass on the table. "As I said just now, I find talking to foreigners particularly fatiguing. I think it's because they're so polite. Come along, let's have some lunch." He led the way to the dining room. Virginia put her hand on Anthony's arm and drew him back a little. "I've done my good deed for the day," she whispered. "I got Lord Caterham to take me to see the body." "Well," demanded Anthony eagerly. One theory of his was to be proved or disproved. Virginia was shaking her head. "You were wrong," she whispered. "It's Prince Michael all right." "Oh." Anthony was deeply chagrined. "And Mademoiselle has the migraine," he added aloud in a dissatisfied tone. "What has that got to do with it?" "Probably nothing, but I wanted to see her. You see, I've found out that Mademoiselle has the second room from the end, the one where I saw the light last night." "That's interesting. Probably there's nothing in it. All the same, I mean to see Mademoiselle before the day is out." Lunch was somewhat of an ordeal. Evening the cheerful impartiality of Bundle failed to reconcile the heterogeneous assembly. The Baron and Andrassy were correct, formal, full of etiquette, and had the air of attending a PG 140 meal in a mausoleum. Lord Caterham was lethargic and depressed. Bill Eversley stared longingly at Virginia. George, very mindful of the trying position in which he found himself, conversed weightily with the Baron and Mr. Isaac Stein. Guggle and Winkle, completely beside themselves with joy of having a murder in the house, had to be continually checked and kept under, whilst Mr. Hiram Fish slowly masticated his food and drawled out dry remarks in his own peculiar idiom. Superintendent Battle had considerately vanished, and nobody knew what had become of him. "Thank God that's over," murmured Bundle to Anthony as they left the table. "And George is taking the foreign contingent over to the Abbey this afternoon to discuss state secrets. That will possibly relieve the atmosphere," agreed Anthony. "I don't mind the Americans so much," continued Bundle. "He and father can talk first editions together quite happily in some secluded spot. Mr. Fish," as the object of their conversation drew near, "I'm planning a peaceful afternoon for you." The American bowed. "That's too kind of you, Lady Eileen." "Mr. Fish," said Anthony, "had quite a peaceful morning." Mr. Fish shot a quick glance at him. "Ah, sir, you observed me, then, in my secluded retreat. There are moments, sir, when far from the madding crowd is the only motto for a man of quiet tastes." Bundle had drifted on, and the American and Anthony were left together. The former dropped his voice a little. "I opine," he said, "that there is considerable mystery about this little dust-up." "Any amount of it," said Anthony. "That guy with the bald head was perhaps a family connection?" "Something of the kind. These Central European nations beat the band," declared Mr. Fish. "It's kind of being rumored around that the deceased gentleman was a royal highness." "Is that so? Do you know? He was staying here as Count Stanislaus," replied Anthony evasively. To this Mr. Fish offered no further rejoinder than the somewhat cryptic, "Oh, boy," after which he relapsed into silence for some moments. "This police captain of yours," he observed at last, "Battle, or whatever his name is he the goods all right?" "Scotland Yard thinks so," replied Anthony dryly. "He seems kind of hidebound to me," remarked Mr. Fish. "No hustle to him. This big idea of his, letting no one leave the house, what is there to it?" He darted a very sharp look at Anthony as he spoke. "Everyone's got to attend the inquest tomorrow morning, you see. That's the idea, is it? No more to it than that. No question of Lord Caterham's guests being suspected." "My dear Mr. Fish, I was getting a mite uneasy, being a stranger in this country. But of course it was an outside job. I remember now. Window found unfastened, wasn't it?" "It was," said Anthony, looking straight in front of him. Mr. Fish sighed. After a minute or two he said in a plaintive tone, "Young man, do you know how they get the water out of a mine?" "How?" "By pumping. But it's almighty hard work." I observe the figure of my genial host detaching itself from the group over there. I must join him. Mr. Fish walked gently away and Bundle drifted back again. "Funny fish, isn't he?" she remarked. "He is." "It's no good looking at Virginia," said Bundle sharply. "I wasn't." "You were." "I don't know how she does it. It isn't what she says. I don't even believe it's what she looks. But, oh, boy, she gets there every time. Anyway, she's on duty elsewhere for the time. She told me to be nice to you, and I'm going to be nice to you, by force if necessary." "No force required," Anthony assured her. "But, if it's all the same to you, I'd rather you were nice to me on the water, in a boat." "It's not a bad idea," said Bundle meditatively. They strolled down to the lake together. "There's just one question I'd like to ask you," said Anthony as he paddled gently out from the shore, "before we turn to really interesting topics. Business before pleasure. Whose bedroom do you want to know about now?" asked Bundle with weary patience. "Nobody's bedroom for the moment, but I would like to know where you got your French governess from." "The man's bewitched," said Bundle. "I got her from an agency, and I pay her £100 a year, and her Christian name is Genevieve." "Anything more you want to know?" We'll assume the agency, said Anthony. What about her references? Oh, glowing. She'd lived for 10 years with the Countess of Whatnot. Whatnot being the Comtesse de Bretuil, Shadow de Bretuil, Dinard. You didn't actually see the Comtesse yourself. It was all done by letter. Exactly. Atm, said Anthony. You intrigue me, said Bundle. You intrigue me enormously. Is it love or crime? Probably sheer idiocy on my part. Let's forget it. Let's forget it, said he negligently, having extracted all the information he wants. Mr. Cade, who do you suspect? I rather suspect Virginia as being the most unlikely person. Or possibly Bill. What about you? Member of the aristocracy joins in secret the comrades of the Red Hand. It would create a sensation all right. Anthony laughed. He liked Bundle, though he was a little afraid of the shrewd penetration of her sharp gray eyes. You must be proud of all this, he said suddenly, waving his hand towards the great house in the distance. Bundle screwed up her eyes and tilted her head on one side. Yes, it means something, I suppose. But one's too used to it. Anyway, we're not here very much. Too deadly dull. We've been at Cowes and Deauville all the summer after town, and then up to Scotland. Chimneys has been swathed in dust sheets for about 5 months. Once a week they take the dust sheets off, and chars, banks full of tourists come and gape, and listen to Treadwell. On your right is the portrait of the 4th Marchioness of Caterham, painted by Sir Joshua Reynolds, etc., and Ed or Bert, the humorist of the party, nudges his girl and says, Gladys, they've got 2 pennyworth of pictures here, right enough. And then they go and look at more pictures and yawn and shuffle their feet and wish it was time to go home. Yet history has been made here once or twice, by all accounts. You've been listening to George, said Bundle sharply. That's the kind of thing he's always saying. But Anthony had raised himself on his elbow and was staring at the shore. Is that a third suspicious stranger I see standing disconsolately by the boathouse? Or is it one of the house party? Bundle lifted her head from the scarlet cushion. It's Bill, she said. He seems to be looking for something. He's probably looking for me, said Bundle without enthusiasm. Shall we row quickly in the opposite direction? That's quite the right answer, but it should be delivered with more enthusiasm. I shall row with double vigor after that rebuke. Not at all, said Bundle. I have my pride. Row me to where that young ass is waiting. Somebody's got to look after him, I suppose. Virginia must have given him the slip. One of these days, inconceivable as it seems, I may want to marry George, so I may as well practice being one of our well-known political hostesses. Anthony pulled obediently towards the shore. And what's to become of me? I should like to know, he complained. I refuse to be the unwanted third. Is that the children I see in the distance? Yes. Be careful, or they'll rope you in. I'm rather fond of children, said Anthony. I may teach them some nice quiet intellectual game. Well, don't say I didn't warn you. Having relinquished Bundle to the care of her gallant captain, Anthony strolled off to where various shrill cries disturbed the peace of the afternoon. He was received with acclamation. Are you any good at playing Red Indians? Asked Guggle sternly. Rather, said Anthony. You should hear the noise I make when I'm being scalped. Like this. He illustrated. Not so bad, said Winkle grudgingly. Now do the scalpers yell. Anthony obliged with a blood-curdling noise. In another minute the game of Red Indians was in full swing. About an hour later, Anthony wiped his forehead and ventured to inquire after Mademoiselle's migraine. He was pleased to hear that that lady had entirely recovered. So popular had he become, that he was urgently invited to come and have tea in the schoolroom. And then you can tell us about the man you saw hung, urged Guggle. Did you say you'd got a bit of the rope with you? Asked Winkle. It's in my suitcase, said Anthony solemnly. You shall each have a piece of it. Winkle immediately let out a wild Indian yell of satisfaction. We'll have to go and get washed, I suppose, said Guggle gloomily. You will come to tea, won't you? You won't forget? Anthony swore solemnly that nothing should prevent his keeping the engagement. Satisfied, the youthful pair beat a retreat towards the house. Anthony stood for a minute looking after them, and, as he did so, he became aware of a man leaving the other side of a little copse of trees and hurrying away across the park. He felt almost sure that it was the same black-bearded stranger he had encountered that morning. Whilst he was hesitating whether to go after him or not, the trees just ahead of him were parted, and Mr. Hiram Fish stepped out into the open. He stared slightly when he saw Anthony. "A peaceful afternoon, Mr. Fish?" inquired the latter. "I thanked you, yes." Mr. Fish did not look as peaceful as usual, however. His face was flushed, and he was breathing hard as though he had been running. He drew out his watch and consulted it. "I guess," he said softly, "it's just about time for your British institution of afternoon tea." Closing his watch with a snap, Mr. Fish ambled gently away in the direction of the house. Anthony stood in a brown study and awoke with a start to the fact that Superintendent Battle was standing beside him. Not the faintest sound had heralded his approach, and he seemed literally to have materialized from space. "Where did you spring from?" asked Anthony irritably. With a slight jerk of his head, Battle indicated the little copse of trees behind them. "It seems a popular spot this afternoon," remarked Anthony. "You were very lost in thought, Mr. Cade." "I was truly. Do you know what I was doing, Battle? I was trying to put 2 and 1 and 5 and 3 together so as to make 4. And it can't be done, Battle. It simply can't be done." "There's difficulties that way," agreed the detective. "But you're just the man I wanted to see, Battle. I want to go away." "Can it be done?" True to his creed, Superintendent Battle showed neither emotion nor surprise. His reply was easy and matter of fact. "That depends, sir, as to where you want to go." "I'll tell you exactly, Battle. I'll lay my cards upon the table. I want to go to Dinard, to the shadow of Madame la Comtesse de Brechuil." "Can it be done?" "When do you want to go, Mr. Cade?" "Say to tomorrow after the inquest. I could be back here by Sunday evening." "I see," said the superintendent with peculiar solidity. "Well, what about it? I've no objection, provided you go where you say you're going and come straight back here. You're a man in 1,000, Battle. Either you have PG 147 taken an extraordinary fancy to me or else you're extraordinarily deep. Which is it?" Superintendent Battle smiled a little, but did not answer. "Well, well," said Anthony, "I expect you'll take your precautions. Discreet minions of the law will follow my suspicious footsteps." "So be it. But I do wish I knew what it was all about." "I don't get you, Mr. Cade. The memoirs, what all the fuss is about. Were they only memoirs? Or have you got something up your sleeve?" Battle smiled again. "Take it like this. I'm doing you a favor because you've made a favorable impression on me, Mr. Cade. I'd like you to work in with me over this case. The amateur and the professional, they go well together. The one has the intimacy, so to speak, and the other the experience." "Well," said Anthony slowly, "I don't mind admitting that I've always wanted to try my hand at unraveling a murder mystery. Any ideas about the case at all, Mr. Cade?" "Plenty of them," said Anthony, "but they're mostly questions. As for instance, who steps into the murdered Michael's shoes? It seems to me that that is important." A rather wry smile came over Superintendent Battle's face. "I wondered if you'd think of that, sir. Prince Nicholas Abalovich is the next heir, first cousin of this gentleman." "And where is he at the present moment?" asked Anthony, turning away to light a cigarette. "Don't tell me you don't know, Battle, because I shan't believe you. We've reason to believe that he's in the United PG 148 states. He was until quite lately, at all events, raising money on his expectations." Anthony gave vent to a surprised whistle. "I get you," said Anthony. "Michael was backed by England, Nicholas by America." In both countries, a group of financiers are anxious to obtain the oil concessions. The Loyalist Party adopted Michael as their candidate. Now they'll have to look elsewhere. Gnashing of teeth on the part of Isaac Stein and Co. and Mr. George Lomax. Rejoicings in Wall Street. Am I right? You're not far off, said Superintendent Battle. Said Anthony. I almost dare swear that I know what you were doing in that copse. The detective smiled, but made no reply. International politics are very fascinating, said Anthony, but I fear I must leave you. I have an appointment in the schoolroom. He strode briskly away towards the house. Inquiries of the dignified Treadwell showed him the way to the schoolroom. He tapped on the door and entered, to be greeted by squeals of joy. Guggle and Winkle immediately rushed at him and bore him in triumph to be introduced to Mademoiselle. For the first time, Anthony felt a qualm. Mademoiselle Brunn was a small, middle-aged woman with a sallow face, pepper and salt hair, and a budding mustache. As the notorious foreign adventuress, she did not fit into the picture at all. I believe, said Anthony to himself, I'm making the most utter fool of myself. Never mind, I must go through with it now. He was extremely pleasant to Mademoiselle, and she, on her part, was evidently delighted to have a good-looking young man invade her schoolroom. The meal was a great success. But that evening, alone in the charming bedchamber that had been allotted to him, Anthony shook his head several times. I'm wrong, he said to himself. For the second time, I'm wrong. Somehow or other, I can't get the hang of this thing. He stopped in his pacing of the floor. What the devil, began Anthony. The door was being softly opened. In another minute a man had slipped into the room and stood deferentially by the door. He was a big fair man, squarely built, with high Slavonic cheekbones and dreamy fanatic eyes. Who the devil are you? Asked Anthony, staring at him. The man replied in perfect English. I am Boris Anchaukov, Prince Michael's servant, eh? That is so. I served my master. He is dead. Now I serve you. It's very kind of you, said Anthony, but I don't happen to want a valet. You are my master now. I will serve you faithfully. Yes, but, look here, I don't need a valet. I can't afford one. Boris Anchaukov looked at him with a touch of scorn. I do not ask for money. I served my master, so will I serve you, to the death. Stepping quickly forward, he dropped on one knee, caught Anthony's hand and placed it on his forehead. Then he rose swiftly and left the room as suddenly as he had come. Anthony stared after him, his face a picture of astonishment. That's damned odd, he said to himself. A faithful sort of dog. Curious the instincts these fellows have. He rose and paced up and down. Chapter 17. A Midnight Adventure. The inquest took place on the following morning. It was extraordinarily unlike the inquests as pictured in sensational fiction. It satisfied Evening George Lomax in its rigid suppression of all interesting details. Superintendent Battle and the coroner, working together with the support of the chief constable, had reduced the proceedings to the lowest level of boredom. Immediately after the inquest, Anthony took an unostentatious departure. His departure was the one bright spot in the day for Bill Eversley. George Lomax, obsessed with the fear that something damaging to his department may leak out, had been exceedingly trying. Miss Oscar and Bill had been in constant attendance. Everything useful and interesting had been done by Miss Oscar. Bill's part had been to run to and fro with countless messages, to decode telegrams, and to listen by the hour to George repeating himself. It was a completely exhausted young man who retired to bed on Saturday night. He had had practically no chance to talk to Virginia all day, owing to George's exactions, and he felt injured and ill-used. Thank goodness, that colonial fellow had taken himself off. He had monopolized far too much of Virginia's society anyway. And of course, if George Lomax went on making an ass of himself like this, his mind seething with resentment, Bill fell asleep, and in dreams came consolation, for he dreamt of Virginia. It was an heroic dream, a dream of burning timbers in which he played the part of the gallant rescuer. He brought down Virginia from the topmost story in his arms. She was unconscious. He laid her on the grass. Then he went off to find a packet of sandwiches. It was most important that he should find that packet of sandwiches. George had it, but instead of giving it up to Bill, he began to dictate telegrams. They were now in the vestry of a church, and any minute Virginia may arrive to be married to him. Poor, he was wearing pajamas. He must get home at once and find his proper clothes. He rushed out to the car. The car would not start. No petrol in the tank. He was getting desperate. And then a big general bus drew up and Virginia got out of it on the arm of the bald-headed Baron. She was deliciously cool and exquisitely dressed in gray. She came over to him and shook him by the shoulders playfully. "Bill," she said. "Oh, Bill." She shook him harder. "Bill," she said. "Wake up. Oh, do wake up." Very dazed, Bill woke up. He was in his bedroom at Chimneys, but part of the dream was with him still. Virginia was leaning over him and was repeating the same words with variations. "Wake up, Bill. Oh, do wake up." "Bill, hello," said Bill, sitting up in bed. "What's the matter?" Virginia gave a sigh of relief. "Thank goodness. I thought you'd never wake up. I've been shaking you and shaking you. Are you properly awake now?" "I think so," said Bill doubtfully. "You great lump," said Virginia. "The trouble I've had. My arms are aching." "These insults are uncalled for," said Bill with dignity. "Let me say, Virginia, that I consider your conduct most unbecoming. Not at all that of a pure young widow. Don't be an idiot, Bill. Things are happening." "What kind of things?" "Queer things. In the council chamber. I thought I heard a door bang somewhere, and I came down to see, and then saw a light in the council chamber. I crept along the passage and peeped through the crack of the door. I couldn't see much, but what I could see was so extraordinary that I felt I must see more. And then, all of a sudden, I felt that I should like a nice, big, strong man with me. And you were the nicest and biggest and strongest man I could think of. So I came in and tried to wake you up quietly. But I've been ages doing it." "I see," said Bill. "And what do you want me to do now? Get up and tackle the burglars?" Virginia wrinkled her brows. "I'm not sure that they are burglars. Bill, it's very queer, but don't let's waste time talking. Get up." Bill slipped obediently out of bed. "Wait while I don a pair of boots, the big ones with nails in them. However big and strong I am, I'm not going to tackle hardened criminals with bare feet." "I like your pajamas, Bill," said Virginia dreamily. "Brightness without vulgarity." "While we're on the subject," remarked Bill, reaching for his second boot, "I like that thingamabob of yours. It's a pretty shade of green. What do you call it? It's not just a dressing gown, is it?" "It's a angleg," said Virginia. "I'm glad you've led such a pure life, Bill." "I haven't," said Bill indignantly. "You've just betrayed the fact. You're very nice, Bill, and I like you. I dare say that tomorrow morning, say about 10 o'clock, a good safe hour for not unduly exciting the emotions, I may evening kiss you." "I always think these things are best carried out on the spur of the moment," suggested Bill. "We've other fish to fry," said Virginia. "If you don't want to put on a gas mask and a shirt of chain mail, shall we start?" "I'm ready," said Bill. He wriggled into a lurid silk dressing gown and picked up a poker. "The orthodox weapon," he observed. "Come on," said Virginia, "and don't make a noise." They crept out of the room, and along the corridor, and then down the wide double staircase. Virginia frowned as they reached the bottom of it. "Those boots of yours aren't exactly domes of silence, are they, Bill?" "Nails will be nails," said Bill. "I'm doing my best." "You'll have to take them off," said Virginia firmly. Bill groaned. "You can carry them in your hand. I want to see if you can make out what's going on in the council chamber." "Bill, it's awfully mysterious. Why should burglars take a man in armor to pieces?" "Well, I suppose they can't take him away whole very well. They disarticulate him and pack him neatly." Virginia shook her head, dissatisfied. What should they want to steal a moldy old suit of armor for? Why, Chimneys is full of treasures that are much easier to take away. Bill shook his head. How many of them are there? He asked, taking a firmer grip of his poker. I couldn't see properly. You know what a keyhole is, and they only had a flashlight. I expect they've gone by now, said Bill hopefully. He sat down on the bottom stair and drew off his boots. Then, holding them in his hand, he crept along the passage that led to the council chamber, Virginia close behind him. They halted outside the massive oak door. All was silent within, but suddenly Virginia pressed his arm, and he nodded. A bright light had shone for a minute through the keyhole. Bill went down on his knees and applied his eye to the orifice. What he saw was confusing in the extreme. PG 154. The scene of the drama that was being enacted inside was evidently just to the left, out of his line of vision. A subdued chink every now and then seemed to point to the fact that the invaders were still dealing with a figure in armor. There were two of these, Bill remembered. They stood together by the wall just under the Holbein portrait. The light of the electric torch was evidently being directed upon the operations in progress. It left the rest of the room nearly in darkness. Once a figure flitted across Bill's line of vision, but there was not sufficient light to distinguish anything about it. It may have been that of a man or a woman. In a minute or two it flitted back again, and then the subdued chinking sounded again. Soon there came a new sound, a faint tap-tap as of knuckles on wood. Bill sat back on his heels suddenly. What is it? Whispered Virginia. Nothing. It's no good going on like this. We can't see anything, and we can't guess what they are up to. I must go in and tackle them. He drew on his boots and stood up. Now, Virginia, listen to me. We'll open the door as softly as possible. You know where the switch of the electric light is? Yes, just by the door. I don't think there are more than two of them. There may be only one. I want to get well into the room. Then, when I say go, I want you to switch on the lights. Do you understand? Perfectly. And don't scream or faint or anything. I won't let anyone hurt you. My hero, murmured Virginia. Bill peered at her suspiciously through the darkness. He heard a faint sound, which may have been either a sob or a laugh. Then he grasped the poker firmly and rose to his feet. He felt that he was fully alive to the situation. Very softly he turned the handle of the door. It yielded and swung gently inwards. Bill felt Virginia close beside him. Together they moved noiselessly into the room. At the farther end of the room, the torch was playing upon the Holbein picture. Silhouetted against it was the figure of a man, standing on a chair and gently tapping on the paneling. His back, of course, was to them, and he merely loomed up as a monstrous shadow. What more they may have seen cannot be told, for at that moment Bill's nails squeaked upon the parquet floor. The man swung round, directing the powerful torch full upon them, and almost dazzling them with the sudden glare. Bill did not hesitate. Go, he roared to Virginia, and sprang for his man, as she obediently pressed down the switch of the electric lights. The big chandelier should have been flooded with light, but, instead, all that happened was the click of the switch. The room remained in darkness. Virginia heard Bill curse freely. The next minute the air was filled with panting, scuffling sounds. The torch had fallen to the ground and extinguished itself in the fall. There was the sound of a desperate struggle going on in the darkness, but as to who was getting the better of it, and truly as to who was taking part in it, Virginia had no idea. Had there been anyone else in the room besides the man who was tapping the paneling? There may have been. Their glimpse had been only a momentary one. Virginia felt paralyzed. She hardly knew what to do. She dared not try and join in the struggle. To do so may hamper and not aid Bill. Her one idea was to stay in the doorway, so that anyone trying to escape should not leave the room that way. At the same time, She disobeyed Bill's express instructions and screamed loudly and repeatedly for help. She heard doors opening upstairs and a sudden gleam PG 156 of light from the hall and the big staircase. If only Bill could hold his man until help came. But at that minute there was a final terrific upheaval. They must have crashed into one of the figures in armor, for it fell to the ground with a deafening noise. Virginia saw dimly a figure springing for the window, and at the same time heard Bill cursing and disengaging himself from fragments of armor. For the first time, she left her post and rushed wildly for the figure at the window. But the window was already unlatched. The intruder had no need to stop and fumble for it. He sprang out and raced away down the terrace and round the corner of the house. Virginia raced after him. She was young and athletic, and she turned the corner of the terrace not many seconds after her quarry. But there she ran headlong into the arms of a man who was emerging from a small side door. It was Mr. Hiram P. Fish. "Gee, it's a lady," he exclaimed. "Why, I beg your pardon, Mrs. Revel. I took you for one of the thugs fleeing from justice." "He's just passed this way," cried Virginia breathlessly. "Can't we catch him?" But, evening as she spoke, she knew it was too late. The man must have gained the park by now, and it was a dark night with no moon. She retraced her steps to the council chamber, Mr. Fish by her side, discoursing in a soothing monotone upon the habits of burglars in general, of which he seemed to have a wide experience. Lord Caterham, Bundle, and various frightened servants were standing in the doorway of the council chamber. "What the devil's the matter?" asked Bundle. "Is it burglars? What are you and Mr. Fish doing, Virginia?" "Taking a midnight stroll." Virginia explained the events of the evening. "How frightfully exciting," commented Bundle. "You don't usually get a murder and a burglary crowded into PG 157 one weekend. What's the matter with the lights in here? They're all right everywhere else." That mystery was soon explained. The bulbs had simply been removed and laid in a row against the wall. Mounted on a pair of steps, the dignified Treadwell, dignified evening in undress, restored illumination to the stricken apartment. "If I am not mistaken," said Lord Caterham in his sad voice as he looked around him, "this room has recently been the center of somewhat violent activity." There was some justice in the remark. Everything that could have been knocked over had been knocked over. The floor was littered with splintered chairs, broken china, and fragments of armor. "How many of them were there?" asked Bundle. "It seems to have been a desperate fight." "Only one, I think," said Virginia. But, evening as she spoke, she hesitated a little. Certainly only one person, a man, had passed out through the window. But as she had rushed after him, she had had a vague impression of a rustle somewhere close at hand. If so, the second occupant of the room could have escaped through the door. Perhaps, though, the rustle had been an effect of her own imagination. Bill appeared suddenly at the window. He was out of breath and panting hard. "Damn the fellow!" he exclaimed wrathfully. "He's escaped. I've been hunting all over the place. Not a sign of him." "Cheer up, Bill," said Virginia. "Better luck next time." "Well," said Lord Caterham, "what do you think we'd better do now? Go back to bed? I can't get hold of Badgeworthy at this time of night. Treadwell, you know the sort of thing that's necessary. Just see to it, will you?" "Very good, my lord." With a sigh of relief, Lord Caterham prepared to retreat. "That beggar, Isochstein, sleeps soundly," he remarked, with a touch of envy. "You'd have thought all this row would have brought him down." He looked across at Mr. Fish. "You found time to dress, I see," he added. "I flung on a few articles of clothing." "Yes," admitted the American. "Very sensible of you," said Lord Caterham. "Damned chilly things, pajamas." He yawned. Chapter 18, Second Midnight Adventure. The first person that Anthony saw as he alighted from his train on the following afternoon was Superintendent Battle. His face broke into a smile. "I've returned according to contract," he remarked. "Did you come down here to assure yourself of the fact?" Battle shook his head. I wasn't worrying about that, Mr. Cade. I happen to be going to London, that's all. You have such a trustful nature, Battle. Do you think so, sir? No, I think you're deep, very deep, still waters, you know, and all that sort of thing. So you're going to London? I am, Mr. Cade. I wonder why. The detective did not reply. You're so chatty, remarked Anthony. That's what I like about you. A far-off twinkle showed in Battle's eyes. What about your own little job, Mr. Cade? He inquired. How did that go off? I've drawn blank. Battle. For the second time I've been proved hopelessly wrong. Bawling, isn't it? What was the idea, sir, if I may ask? I suspected the French governess, Battle. A. Upon the grounds of her being the most unlikely person, according to the canons of the best fiction. B. Because there was a light in her room on the night of the tragedy. That wasn't much to go upon. You are quite right. It was not. But I discovered that she had only been here a short time, and I also found a suspicious Frenchman spying round the place. You know all about him, I suppose? You mean the man who calls himself M. Charles, staying at the Cricketers? A traveller in silk. That's it, is it? What about him? What does Scotland Yard think? His actions have been suspicious, said Superintendent Battle expressionlessly. Very suspicious, I should say. Well, I put two and two together. French governess in the house, French stranger outside. I decided that they were in league together, and I hurried off to interview the lady with whom Mademoiselle Brunn had lived for the last 10 years. I was fully prepared to find that she had never heard of any such person as Mademoiselle Brunn, but I was wrong. Battle. Mademoiselle is the genuine article. Battle nodded. I must admit, said Anthony, that as soon as I spoke to her I had an uneasy conviction that I was barking up the wrong tree. She seemed so absolutely the governess. Again Battle nodded. All the same, Mr. Cade, you can't always go by that. Women especially can do a lot with make-up. I've seen quite a pretty girl with the color of her hair altered, a sallow complexion stain, slightly reddened eyelids, and most efficacious of all, dowdy clothes, who would fail to be identified by 9 people out of 10 who had seen her in her former character. Men haven't got quite the same pull. You can do something with the eyebrows, and of course different sets of false teeth alter the whole expression. But there are always the ears. There's an extraordinary lot of character in ears, Mr. Cade. Don't look so hard at mine. Battle, complained Anthony. You make me quite nervous. I'm not talking of false beard and grease paint. Co-PG 161, continued the superintendent. That's only for books. No, there are very few men who can escape identification and put it over on you. In fact, there's only one man I know who has a positive genius for impersonation. King Victor. Ever heard of King Victor, Mr. Cade? There was something so sharp and sudden about the way the detective put the question that Anthony half checked the words that were rising to his lips. King Victor, he said reflectively instead. Somehow, I seem to have heard the name. One of the most celebrated jewel thieves in the world. Irish father, French mother. Can speak 5 languages at least. He's been serving a sentence, but his time was up a few months ago. Really? And where is he supposed to be now? Well, Mr. Cade, that's what we'd rather like to know. The plot thickens, said Anthony lightly. No chance of his turning up here, is there? But I suppose he wouldn't be interested in political memoirs, only in jewels. There's no saying, said Superintendent Battle. For all we know, he may be here already, disguised as the second footman. Splendid. You'll recognize him by his ears and cover yourself with glory. Quite fond of your little joke, aren't you, Mr. Cade? By the way, what do you think of that curious business at Staines? Staines? Said Anthony. What's been happening at Staines? It was in Saturday's papers. I thought you may have seen about it. Man found by the roadside shot. A foreigner. It was in the papers again today, of course. I did see something about it, said Anthony carelessly. Not suicide, apparently. No, there was no weapon. As yet the man hasn't been identified. You seem very interested, said Anthony, smiling. PG 162. No connection with Prince Michael's death, is there? His hand was quite steady, so were his eyes. Was it his fancy? That Superintendent Battle was looking at him with peculiar intentness. Seems to be quite an epidemic of that sort of thing, said Battle. But, well, I dare say there's nothing in it. He turned away, beckoning to a porter as the London train came thundering in. Anthony drew a faint sigh of relief. He strolled across the park in an unusually thoughtful mood. He purposely chose to approach the house from the same direction as that from which he had come on the fateful Thursday night, and as he drew near to it he looked up at the windows, cudgelling his brains to make sure of the one where he had seen the light. Was he quite sure that it was the second from the end? And, doing so, he made a discovery. There was an angle at the corner of the house in which was a window set farther back. Standing on one spot, you counted this window as the first, and the first one built out over the council chamber as the second, but move a few yards to the right, and the part built out over the council chamber appeared to be the end of the house. The first window was invisible, and the two windows of the rooms over the council chamber would have appeared the first and second from the end. Where exactly had he been standing when he had seen the light flash up? Anthony found the question very hard to determine. A matter of a yard or so made all the difference. But one point was made abundantly clear. It was quite possible that he had been mistaken in describing the light as occurring in the second room from the end. It may equally well have been the third. Now, who occupied the third room? Anthony was determined to find that out as soon as possible. Fortune favored him. In the hall, Treadwell had just set the massive silver urn in its place on the tea tray. Nobody else was there. "Hullo, Treadwell," said Anthony. "I wanted to ask you something. Who has the third room from the end on the west side? Over the council chamber, I mean." Treadwell reflected for a minute or two. "That would be the American gentleman's room, sir." "Mr. Fish. Oh, is it? Thank you." "Not at all, sir." Treadwell prepared to depart, then paused. The desire to be the first to impart news makes evening pontifical butlers human. "Perhaps you have heard, sir, of what occurred last night?" "Not a word," said Anthony. "What did occur last night?" "An attempt at robbery, sir." "Not really? Was anything taken?" "No, sir." The thieves were dismantling the suits of armor in the council chamber when they were surprised and forced to flee. Unfortunately, they got clear away. "That's very extraordinary," said Anthony. "The council chamber again. Did they break in that way?" "It is supposed, sir, that they forced the window." Satisfied with the interest his information had aroused, Treadwell resumed his retreat, but brought up short with a dignified apology. "I beg your pardon, sir. I didn't hear you come in, and I didn't know you were standing just behind me." Mr. Isaacstein, who had been the victim of the impact, waved his hand in a friendly fashion. "No harm done, my good fellow. I assure you no harm done." Treadwell retired looking contemptuous, and Isaacstein came forward and dropped into an easy chair. "Hello, Cade, so you're back again. Been hearing all about last night's little show?" "Yes," said Anthony. "Rather an exciting weekend, isn't it?" "I should imagine that last night was the work of local men," said Isaacstein. "It seems a clumsy, amateurish affair." "Is there anyone about here who collects armor?" asked Anthony. "It seems a curious thing to select." "Very curious," agreed Mr. Isaacstein. He paused a minute, and then said slowly, "The whole position here is very unfortunate." There was something almost menacing in his tone. "I don't quite understand," said Anthony. "Why are we all being kept here in this way?" "The inquest was over yesterday. The prince's body will be removed to London, where it is being given out that he died of heart failure, and still nobody is allowed to leave the house. Mr. Lomax knows no more than I do. He refers me to Superintendent Battle." "Superintendent Battle has something up his sleeve," said Anthony thoughtfully. and it seems the essence of his plan that nobody should leave. But, excuse me, Mr. Cade, you have been away, with a string tied to my leg. I've no doubt that I was shadowed the whole time. I shouldn't have been given a chance of disposing of the revolver or anything of that kind. Ah, the revolver, said Isaacstein thoughtfully. That has not yet been found, I think. Not yet. Possibly thrown into the lake in passing. Very possibly. Where is Superintendent Battle? I have not seen him this afternoon. He's gone to London. I met him at the station. Gone to London? Really? Did he say when he would be back? Early to tomorrow, so I understood. Virginia came in with Lord Caterham and Mr. Fish. She smiled a welcome at Anthony. So you're back, Mr. Cade. Have you heard all about our adventures last night? Why, truly, Mr. Cade, said Hiram Fish. It was a night of strenuous excitement. Did you hear that I mistook Mrs. Revel for one of the thugs? And in the meantime, said Anthony, the thug got clear away, said Mr. Fish mournfully. Do pour out, said Lord Caterham to Virginia. I don't know where Bundle is. Virginia officiated. Then she came and sat down near Anthony. Come to the boathouse after tea, she said in a low voice. Bill and I have got a lot to tell you. Then she joined lightly in the general conversation. The meeting at the boathouse was duly held. Virginia and Bill were bubbling over with their news. They agreed that a boat in the middle of the lake was the only safe place for confidential conversation. Having paddled out a sufficient distance, the full story of last night's adventure was related to Anthony. Bill looked a little sulky. He wished Virginia would not insist on bringing this colonial fellow into it. It's very odd, said Anthony, when the story was finished. What do you make of it? He'd asked Virginia. I think they were looking for something, she returned promptly. The burglar idea is absurd. They thought the something, whatever it was, may be concealed in the suits of armor. That's clear enough. But why tap the paneling? That looks more as though they were looking for a secret staircase, or something of that kind. There's a priest's hole at Chimneys, I know, said Virginia, and I believe there's a secret staircase as well. Lord Caterham would tell us all about it. What I want to know is, what can they have been looking for? It can't be the memoirs, said Anthony. They're a great bulky package. It must have been something small. George knows, I expect, said Virginia. I wonder whether I could get it out of him. All along I felt there was something behind all this. You say there was only one man, pursued Anthony, but that there may possibly be another, as you thought you heard someone going towards the door as you sprang to the window. The sound was very slight, said Virginia. It may have been just my imagination. That's quite possible. But in case it wasn't your imagination, the second person must have been an inmate of the house. I wonder now. What are you wondering at? Asked Virginia. The thoroughness of Mr. Hiram Fish, who dresses himself completely when he hears screams for help downstairs. There's something in that, agreed Virginia. And then there's Isaacstein, who sleeps through it all. That's suspicious too. Surely he couldn't. There's that fellow Boris, suggested Bill. He looks an unmitigated ruffian. Michael's servant. I mean, Chimneys is full of suspicious characters, said Virginia. I dare say the others are just as suspicious of us. I wish Superintendent Battle hadn't gone to London. I think it's rather stupid of him. By the way, Mr. Cade, I've seen that peculiar-looking Frenchman about once or twice, spying round the park. It's a mix-up, confessed Anthony. I've been away on a wild goose chase. Made a thorough ass of myself. Look here, to me the whole question seems to resolve itself into this. Did the men find what they were looking for last night? Supposing they didn't, said Virginia. I'm pretty sure they didn't, as a matter of fact. Just this, I believe they'll come again. They know, PG 167, or they soon will know, that Battle's in London. They'll take the risk and come again tonight. Do you really think so? It's a chance. Now we three will form a little syndicate. Eversley and I will conceal ourselves with due precautions in the council chamber." "What about me?" interrupted Virginia. "Don't think you're going to leave me out of it." "Listen to me, Virginia," said Bill. "This is man's work. Don't be an idiot, Bill. I'm in on this. Don't you make any mistake about it. The syndicate will keep watch tonight." It was settled thus, and the details of the plan were laid. After the party had retired to bed, first one and then another of the syndicate crept down. They were all armed with powerful electric torches, and in the pocket of Anthony's coat lay a revolver. Anthony had said that he believed another attempt to resume the search would be made. Nevertheless, he did not expect that the attempt would be made from outside. He believed that Virginia had been correct in her guess that someone had passed her in the dark the night before, and as he stood in the shadow of an old oak dresser, it was towards the door, and not the window, that his eyes were directed. Virginia was crouching behind a figure in armor on the opposite wall, and Bill was by the window. The minutes passed at interminable length. 1 o'clock chimed, then the half-hour, then 2, then another half-hour. Anthony felt stiff and cramped. He was coming slowly to the conclusion that he had been wrong. No attempt would be made tonight. And then he stiffened suddenly, all his senses on the alert. He had heard a footstep on the terrace outside. Silence again, then a low scratching noise at the window. Suddenly it ceased, and the window swung open. A man stepped across the sill into the room. He stood quite still for a moment, peering round as PG 168, though listening. After a minute or two, seemingly satisfied, he switched on a torch he carried and turned it rapidly round the room. Apparently he saw nothing unusual. The three watchers held their breath. He went over to the same bit of paneled wall he had been examining the night before, and then a terrible knowledge smote Bill. He was going to sneeze. The wild race through the dew-laden park the night before had given him a chill. All day he had sneezed intermittently. A sneeze was due now, and nothing on earth would stop it. He'd adopted all the remedies he could think of. He pressed his upper lip, swallowed hard, threw back his head and looked at the ceiling. As a last resort he held his nose and pinched it violently. It was of no avail. He sneezed. A stifled, checked, emasculated sneeze, but a startling sound in the deadly quiet of the room. The stranger sprang round, and in the same minute Anthony acted. He flashed on his torch and jumped full for the stranger. In another minute they were down on the floor together. "Lights!" shouted Anthony. Virginia was ready at the switch. The lights came on true and full tonight. Anthony was on top of his man. Bill leant down to give him a hand. "And now," said Anthony, "let's see who you are, my fine fellow." He rolled his victim over. It was the neat, dark-bearded stranger from the Cricketers. "Very nice truly," said an approving voice. They all looked up startled. The bulky form of Superintendent Battle was standing in the open doorway. "I thought you were in London, Superintendent Battle," said Anthony. Battle's eyes twinkled. "Did you, sir?" he said. "Well, I thought it would be a good thing if I was thought to be going." "And it has been," agreed Anthony, looking down at his prostrate foe. To his surprise, there was a slight smile on the stranger's face. "May I get up, gentlemen?" he'd inquired. "You are 3-1. Anthony kindly hauled him onto his legs. The stranger settled his coat, pulled up his collar, and directed a keen look at Battle. "I demand pardon," he said, "but do I understand that you are a representative from Scotland Yard?" "That's right," said Battle. "Then I will present to you my credentials." He smiled rather ruefully. "I would have been wise to do so before." He took some papers from his pocket and handed them to the Scotland Yard detective. At the same time, he turned back the lapel of his coat and showed something pinned there. Battle gave an exclamation of astonishment. He looked through the papers and handed them back with a little bow. "I'm sorry you've been manhandled, monsieur," he said, "but you brought it on yourself, you know." He smiled, noting the astonished expression on the faces of the other. This is a colleague we have been expecting for some time, he said. Chapter 19, Secret History. They all stared at the French detective, who smiled back at them. But yes, he said, it is true. There was a pause for general readjusting of ideas. Then Virginia turned to Battle. Do you know what I think, Superintendent Battle? What do you think, Mrs. Revel? I think the time has come to enlighten us a little. To enlighten you? I don't quite understand, Mrs. Revel, Superintendent Battle, you understand perfectly. I dare say Mr. Lomax has hedged you about with recommendations of secrecy, George would, but surely it's better to tell us than have us stumbling on the secret all by ourselves, and perhaps doing untold harm. Lemine, don't you agree with me? Madam, I agree with you entirely. You can't go on keeping things dark forever, said Battle. I've told Mr. Lomax so. Mr. Eversley is Mr. Lomax's secretary. There's no objection to his knowing what there is to know. As for Mr. Cade, he's been brought into the thing willy-nilly, and I consider he's a right to know where he stands. But Battle paused. I know, said Virginia. Women are so indiscreet. I've often heard George say so. Lemwin had been studying Virginia attentively. Now he turned to the Scotland Yard man. Did I hear you just now address Madam by the name of Revel? That is my name, said Virginia. Your husband was in the diplomatic service, was he not? And you were with him in Czechoslovakia just before the assassination of the late king and queen. Yes. Lemine turned again. I think Madam has a right to hear the story. She is indirectly concerned. Moreover, his eyes twinkled a little. Madam's reputation for discretion stands very high in diplomatic circles. I'm glad they give me a good character, said Virginia, laughing. And I'm glad I'm not going to be left out of it. What about refreshments? Said Anthony. Where does the conference take place? Here, if you please, sir, said Battle. I've a fancy for not leaving this room until morning. You'll see why when you've heard the story. Then I'll go and forage, said Anthony. Bill went with him and they returned with a tray of glasses, siphons, and other necessaries of life. The augmented syndicate established itself comfortably in the corner by the window, being grouped round a long oak table. It's understood, of course, said Battle, that anything that's said here is said in strict confidence. There must be no leakage. I've always felt it would come out one of these days. Gentlemen like Mr. Lomax who want everything hushed up take bigger risks than they think. The start of this business was just over 7 years ago. There was a lot of what they call reconstruction going on, especially in the Near East. There was a good deal going on in England, strictly on the QT with that old gentleman, Count Styletich, pulling the strings. All the Balkan states were interested parties, and there were a lot of royal personages in England just then. I'm not PG 172 going into details, but something disappeared in a way that seemed incredible unless you admitted two things, that the thief was a royal personage and that at the same time it was the work of a high-class professional. Lemine here will tell you how that well may be. The Frenchman bowed courteously and took up the tale. It is possible that you in England may not even have heard of our famous and fantastic King Victor. What his real name is, no one knows, but he is a man of singular courage and daring, one who speaks 5 languages and is unequaled in the art of disguise. Though his father is known to have been either English or Irish, he himself has worked chiefly in Paris. It was there, nearly 8 years ago, that he was carrying out a daring series of robberies and living under the name of Captain O'Neill. A faint exclamation escaped Virginia. Lemine darted a keen glance at her. I think I understand what agitates Madam. You will see in a minute. Now we of the Esrat had our suspicions that this Captain O'Neill was none other than King Victor, but we could not obtain the necessary proof. There was also in Paris at the time a clever young actress, Anglemory, of the Foley's Burgers. For some time, we had suspected that she was associated with the operations of King Victor, but again no proof was forthcoming. About that time, Paris was preparing for the visit of the young King Nicholas Roman IV of Czechoslovakia. At the Esrat we were given special instructions as to the course to be adopted to ensure the safety of His Majesty. In particular, we were warned to superintend the activities of a certain revolutionary organization, which called itself the Comrades of the Red Hand. It is fairly certain now that the comrades approached Anglemory and offered her a huge sum if she would aid them in their plans. Her part was to infatuate the young king and decoy him to some spot agreed upon with them. Anglemory accepted PG 173 the bribe and promised to perform her part. But the young lady was cleverer and more ambitious than her employers suspected. She succeeded in captivating the king, who fell desperately in love with her and loaded her with jewels. It was then that she conceived the idea of being not a king's mistress, but a queen. As everyone knows, she realized her ambition. She was introduced into Czechoslovakia as the Countess Viraga Popolski, an offshoot of the Romanovs, and became eventually Queen Viraga of Czechoslovakia. Not bad for a little Persian actress. I have always heard that she played the part extremely well, but her triumph was not to be long-lived. The comrades of the Red Hand, furious at her betrayal, twice attempted her life. Finally, they worked up the country to such a pitch that a revolution broke out in which both the king and queen perished. Their bodies, horribly mutilated and hardly recognizable, were recovered, attesting to the fury of the populace against the low-born foreign queen. Now, in all this, it seems certain that Queen Viraga still kept in with her confederate, King Victor. It is possible that the bold plan was his all along. What is known is that she continued to correspond with him, in a secret code, from the court of Czechoslovakia. For safety, the letters were written in English and signed with the name of an English lady then at the embassy. If any inquiry had been made, and the lady in question had denied her signature, it is possible that she would not have been believed, for the letters were those of a guilty woman to her lover. "It was your name she used, Mrs. Revel." "I know," said Virginia. Her color was coming and going unevenly. "So that is the truth of the letters. I have wondered and wondered." "What a blackguardly trick!" cried Bill indignantly. The letters were addressed to Captain O'Neill at his rooms in Paris, and their principal purpose may have light shed upon it by a curious fact, which came to light later. After the assassination of the king and queen, PG 174, many of the crown jewels which had fallen, of course, into the hands of the mob, found their way to Paris, and it was discovered that in 9 cases out of 10 the principal stones had been replaced by paste, and mind you, there were some very famous stones among the jewels of Czechoslovakia. So, as a queen, Anglemory still practiced her former activities. You see now where we have arrived. Nicholas Roman IV and Queen Viraga came to England and were the guests of the late Marquis of Caterham, then Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs. Czechoslovakia is a small country, but it could not be left out. Queen Viraga was necessarily received. And there we have a royal personage and at the same time an expert thief. There is also no doubt that the substitute which was so wonderful as to deceive anyone but an expert could only have been fashioned by King Victor, and truly the whole plan, in its daring and audacity, pointed to him as the author. "What happened?" asked Virginia. "Hushed up," said Superintendent Battle laconically. "Not a mention of it's ever been made public to this day. We did all that could be done on the quiet, and that was a good deal more than you'd ever imagine. By the way, we've got methods of our own that would surprise. That jewel didn't leave England with the Queen of Czechoslovakia, I can tell you that much. No, Her Majesty hid it somewhere, but where we've never been able to discover. But I shouldn't wonder," Superintendent Battle let his eyes wander gently round, "if it wasn't somewhere in this room." Anthony leapt to his feet. "What? After all these years?" he cried incredulously. "Impossible. You do not know the peculiar circumstances, monsieur," said the Frenchman quickly. "Only a fortnight later, the revolution in Czechoslovakia broke out. and the king and queen were murdered. Also, Captain O'Neill was arrested in Paris and sentenced on a minor charge. PG 175. We hoped to find the packet of code letters in his house, but it appears that this had been stolen by some Czechoslovakian go-between. The man turned up in Czechoslovakia just before the revolution and then disappeared completely. He probably went abroad, said Anthony thoughtfully. To Africa as likely as not. And you bet he hung onto that packet. It was as good as a gold mine to him. It's odd how things come about. They probably called him Dutch Pedro or something like that out there. He caught Superintendent Battle's expressionless glance bent upon him, and smiled. It's not really clairvoyance, Battle, he said, though it sounds like it. I'll tell you soon. There is one thing you have not explained, said Virginia. Where does this link up with the memoirs? There must be a link, surely. Madam is very quick, said Lemoyne approvingly. Yes, there is a link. Count Styletich was also staying at Chimneys at the time, so that he may have known about it. Parfaitement. And, of course, said Battle, if he's blurted it out in his precious memoirs, the fat will be in the fire. Especially after the way the whole thing was hushed up. Anthony lit a cigarette. There's no possibility of there being a clue in the memoirs as to where the stone was hidden? He asked. Very unlikely, said Battle decisively. He was never in with the Queen, opposed the marriage tooth and nail. She's not likely to have taken him into her confidence. I wasn't suggesting such a thing for a minute, said Anthony, but by all accounts he was a cunning old boy. Unknown to her, he may have discovered where she hid the jewel. In that case, what would he have done? Do you think? Sat tight, said Battle, after a moment's reflection. I agree, said the Frenchman. It was a ticklish MPG 176 oment. You see, to return the stone anonymously would have presented great difficulties. Also, the knowledge of its whereabouts would give him great power, and he liked power. That strange old man. Not only did he hold the Queen in the hollow of his hand, but he had a powerful weapon to negotiate with at any time. It was not the only secret he possessed. Oh, no. He collected secrets like some men collect rare pieces of china. It is said that, once or twice before his death, he boasted to people of the things he could make public if the fancy took him. And once at least he declared that he intended to make some startling revelations in his memoirs. Therefore, the Frenchman smiled rather dryly, the general anxiety to get hold of them. Our own secret police intended to seize them, but the Count took the precaution to have them conveyed away before his death. Still, there's no real reason to believe that he knew this particular secret, said Battle. I beg your pardon, said Anthony quietly. There are his own words. What? Both detectives stared at him as though unable to believe their ears. When Mr. McGrath gave me that manuscript to bring to England, he told me the circumstances of his one meeting with Count Styletich. It was in Paris. At some considerable risk to himself, Mr. McGrath rescued the Count from a band of Apaches. He was, I understand, shall we say a trifle, exhilarated. Being in that condition, he made two rather interesting remarks. One of them was to the effect that he knew where the Koh-i-Noor was, a statement to which my friend paid very little attention. He also said that the gang in question were King Victor's men, taken together. Those two remarks are very significant. Good Lord, ejaculated Superintendent Battle. I should say they were evening the murder of Prince Michael wears a different aspect. King Victor has never taken a life, the Frenchman reminded him. Supposing he were surprised when he was searching for the jewel. Is he in England, then? Asked Anthony sharply. You say that he was released a few months ago. Didn't you keep track of him? A rather rueful smile overspread the French detective's face. We tried to, monsieur, but he is a devil, that man. He gave us the slip at once. We thought, of course, that he would make straight for England. But no, he went, where do you think? Where? Said Anthony. He was staring intently at the Frenchman, and absent-mindedly his fingers played with a box of matches. To America, to the United States. What? There was sheer amazement in Anthony's tone. Yes, and what do you think he called himself? What part do you think he played over there? The part of Prince Nicholas of Czechoslovakia. The matchbox fell from Anthony's hand, but his amazement was fully equaled by that of Battle. Impossible. Not so, my friend. You, too, will get the news in the morning. It has been the most colossal bluff. As you know, Prince Nicholas was rumored to have died in the Congo years ago. Our friend, King Victor, seizes on that. Difficult to prove a death of that kind. He resurrects Prince Nicholas and plays him to such purpose that he gets away with a tremendous haul of American dollars, all on account of the supposed oil concessions. But by a mere accident he was unmasked and had to leave the country hurriedly. This time he did come to England, and that is why I am here. Sooner or later he will come to Chimneys. That is, if he is not already here. You think that? I think he was here the night Prince Michael died, and again last night. It was another attempt, eh? Said Battle. It was another attempt. What has bothered me, continued Battle, was wondering what had become of Lemoyne here. I'd had word from Paris that he was on his way over to work with me, and I couldn't make out why he hadn't turned up. I must truly apologize, said Lemoyne. You see, I arrived on the morning after the murder. It occurred to me at once that it would be as well for me to study things from an unofficial standpoint without appearing officially as your colleague. I thought that great possibilities lay that way. I was, of course, aware that I was bound to be an object of suspicion, but that in a way furthered my plan since it would not put people I was after on their guard. I can assure you that I have seen a good deal that is interesting in the last 2 days. But look here, said Bill, what really did happen last night? I am afraid, said Lemoyne, that I gave you rather violent exercise. It was you I chased then? Yes, I will recount things to you. I came up here to watch, convinced that the secret had to do with this room since the prince had been killed here. I stood outside on the terrace. Soon I became aware that someone was moving about in this room. I could see the flash of a torch now and again. I tried the middle window and found it unlatched. Whether the man had entered that way earlier, or whether he had left it so as a blind in case he was disturbed, I do not know. Very gently, I pushed it back and slipped inside the room. Step by step I felt my way until I was in a spot where I could watch operations without likelihood of being discovered myself. The man himself I could not see clearly. His back was to me, of course, and he was silhouetted against the light PG 179 of the torch so that his outline only could be seen. But his actions filled me with surprise. He took to pieces first one and then the other of those 2 suits of armor, examining each one piece by piece. When he had convinced himself that what he sought was not there, he began tapping the paneling of the wall under that picture. What he would have done next, I do not know. The interruption came. You burst in. He looked at Bill. Our well-meant interference was really rather a pity, said Virginia thoughtfully. In a sense, madam, it was. The man switched out his torch, and I, who had no wish as yet to be forced to reveal my identity, sprang for the window. I collided with the other 2 in the dark and fell headlong. I sprang up and out through the window. Mr. Eversley, taking me for his assailant, followed. I followed you first, said Virginia. Bill was only second in the race, and the other fellow had the sense to stay still and sneak out through the door. I wonder he didn't meet the rescuing crowd. That would present no difficulties, said Lemoyne. He would be a rescuer in advance of the rest, that was all. Do you really think this Arsène Lupin fellow is actually among the household now? Asked Bill, his eyes sparkling. Why not? Said Lemoyne. He could pass perfectly as a servant. For all we may know, he may be Boris Anchakov, the trusted servant of the late Prince Michael. He is an odd-looking bloke, agreed Bill. But Anthony was smiling. That's hardly worthy of you, Lemoyne, he said gently. The Frenchman smiled too. You've taken him on as your valet now, haven't you, Mr. Cade? Asked Superintendent Battle. Battle, I take off my hat to you. You know everything. But just as a matter of detail, he's taken me on, not I him. Why was that, I wonder, Mr. Cade? I don't know, said Anthony lightly. It's a curious taste, but perhaps he may have liked my face. Or he may think I murdered his master and wish to establish himself in a handy position for executing revenge upon me. He rose and went over to the windows, pulling the curtains. Daylight, he said, with a slight yawn. There won't be any more excitements now. Lemoyne rose also. I will leave you, he said. We shall perhaps meet again later in the day. With a graceful bow to Virginia, he stepped out of the window. Bed, said Virginia, yawning. It's all been very exciting. Come on, Bill, go to bed like a good little boy. The breakfast table will see us not, I fear. Anthony stayed at the window looking after the retreating form of M. Lemoyne. You wouldn't think it, said Battle behind him, but that's supposed to be the cleverest detective in France. I don't know that I wouldn't, said Anthony thoughtfully. I rather think I would. Well, said Battle, he was right about the excitements of this night being over. By the way, do you remember my telling you about that man they'd found shot near Staines? Yes. Why, nothing. They've identified him, that's all. It seems he was called Giuseppe Manelli. He was a waiter at the Blitz in London. Chapter 20. Battle and Anthony confer. Anthony said nothing. He continued to stare out of the window. Superintendent Battle looked for some time at his motionless back. Well, good night, sir, he said at last, and moved to the door. Anthony stirred. Wait a minute, Battle. The superintendent halted obediently. Anthony left the window. He drew out a cigarette from his case and lighted it. Then, between two puffs of smoke, he said, You seem very interested in this business at Staines? I wouldn't go as far as that, sir. It's unusual, that's all. Do you think the man was shot where he was found, or do you think he was killed elsewhere and the body brought to that particular spot afterwards? I think he was shot somewhere else, and the body brought there in a car. I think so too, said Anthony. Something in the emphasis of his tone made the detective look up sharply. Any ideas of your own, sir? Do you know who brought him there? Yes, said Anthony. I did. He was a little annoyed at the absolutely unruffled calm preserved by the other. I must say you take these shocks very well, Battle, he remarked. Never display emotion. That was a rule that was given to me once, and I've found it very useful. You live up to it, certainly, said Anthony. I can't say I've ever seen you ruffled. Well, do you want to hear the whole story? If you please, Mr. Cade. Anthony pulled up two of the chairs. Both men sat down, and Anthony recounted the events of the preceding Thursday night. Battle listened immovably. There was a far-off twinkle in his eyes as Anthony finished. You know, sir, he said, you'll get into trouble one of these days. Then, for the second time, I'm not to be taken into custody. We always like to give a man plenty of rope, said Superintendent Battle. Very delicately put, said Anthony, without unduly stressing the end of the proverb. What I can't quite make out, sir, said Battle, is why you decided to come across with this now. It's rather difficult to explain, said Anthony. You see, Battle, I've come to have really a very high opinion of your abilities. When the moment comes, you're always there. Look at tonight. And it occurred to me that, in withholding this knowledge of mine, I was seriously cramping your style. You deserve to have access to all the facts. I've done what I could, and up to now I've made a mess of things. Until tonight, I couldn't speak for Mrs. Revel's sake, but now that those letters have been definitely proved to have nothing whatever to do with her, any idea of her complicity becomes absurd. Perhaps I advised her badly in the first place, but it struck me that her statement of having paid this man money to suppress the letters, simply as a whim, may take a bit of believing. It may, by a jury, agreed Battle. Juries never have any imagination. But you accept it quite easily, said Anthony. looking curiously at him. Well, you see, Mr. Cade, most of my work has lain amongst these people, what they call the upper classes, I mean. You see, the majority of people are always wondering what the neighbors will think, but tramps and aristocrats don't. They just do the first thing that comes into their heads, and they don't bother to think what anyone thinks of them. I'm not meaning just the idle rich, the people who give big parties, and so on. I mean those that have had it born and bred in them for generations that nobody else's opinion counts but their own. I've always found the upper classes the same, fearless, truthful, and sometimes extraordinarily foolish. This is a very interesting lecture, Battle. I suppose you'll be writing your reminiscences one of these days. They ought to be worth reading too. The detective acknowledged the suggestion with a smile but said nothing. I'd rather like to ask you one question, continued Anthony. Did you connect me at all with the Staines affair? I fancied, from your manner, that you did. Quite right. I had a hunch that way, but nothing definite to go upon. Your manner was very good, if I may say so, Mr. Cade. You never overdid the carelessness. I'm glad of that, said Anthony. I've a feeling that ever since I met you, you've been laying little traps for me. On the whole, I've managed to avoid falling into them, but the strain has been acute. Battle smiled grimly. That's how you get a crook in the end, sir. Keep him on the run, to and fro, turning and twisting. Sooner or later, his nerve goes, and you've got him. You're a cheerful fellow, Battle. When will you get me, I wonder? Plenty of rope, sir, quoted the superintendent. Plenty of rope. In the meantime, said Anthony, I'm still the amateur assistant? That's it, Mr. Cade. Watson to your Sherlock. In fact, detective stories are mostly bunkum, said Battle unemotionally. But they amuse people, he added as an afterthought, and they're useful sometimes. In what way? Asked Anthony curiously. They encourage the universal idea that the police are stupid. When we get an amateur crime, such as a murder, that's very useful truly. Anthony looked at him for some minutes in silence. Battle sat quite still, blinking now and then, with no expression whatever on his square placid face. Soon he rose. Not much good going to bed now, he observed. As soon as he's up, I want to have a few words with his lordship. Anyone who wants to leave the house can do so now. At the same time, I should be much obliged to his lordship if he'll extend an informal invitation to his guests to stay on. You'll accept it, sir, if you please, and Mrs. Revel also. Have you ever found the revolver? Asked Anthony suddenly. You mean the one Prince Michael was shot with? No, I haven't. Yet it must be in the house or grounds. I'll take a hint from you, Mr. Cade, and send some boys up bird's nesting. If I could get hold of the revolver, we may get forward a bit. That and the bundle of letters. You say that a letter with the heading, Chimneys, was amongst them? Depend upon it, that was the last one written. The instructions for finding the diamond are written in code in that letter. What's your theory of the killing of Giuseppe? Asked Anthony. I should say he was a regular thief, and that he was got hold of either by King Victor or by the comrades of the Red Hand, and employed by them. I shouldn't PG 185 wonder at all if the comrades and King Victor aren't working together. The organization has plenty of money and power, but it isn't very strong in brains. Giuseppe's task was to steal the memoirs. They couldn't have known that you had the letters. It's a very odd coincidence that you should have, by the way. I know, said Anthony. It's amazing when you come to think of it. Giuseppe gets hold of the letters instead, is at first vastly chagrined, then sees the cutting from the paper and has the brilliant idea of turning them to account on his own by blackmailing the lady. He has, of course, no idea of their real significance. The comrades find out what he is doing, believe that he is deliberately double-crossing them, and decree his death. They're very fond of executing traitors. It has a picturesque element which seems to appeal to them. What I can't quite make out is the revolver with Virginia engraved upon it. There's too much finesse about that for the comrades. As a rule, they enjoy plastering their red hand sign about in order to strike terror into other would-be traitors. No, it looks to me as though King Victor had stepped in there, but what his motive was, I don't know. It looks like a very deliberate attempt to saddle Mrs. Revel with the murder, and on the surface, there doesn't seem any particular point in that. I had a theory, said Anthony, but it didn't work out according to plan. He told Battle of Virginia's recognition of Michael. Battle nodded his head. Oh, yes, no doubt as to his identity. By the way, that old baron has a very high opinion of you. He speaks of you in most enthusiastic terms. That's very kind of him, said Anthony, especially as I've given him full warning that I mean to do my utmost to get hold of the missing memoirs before Wednesday next. You'll have a job to do that, said Battle. Why, you think so? I suppose King Victor and Co. have got the letters. Battle nodded. Pinched them off Giuseppe that day in Pont Street. Prettily planned piece of work, that. Yes, they've got 'em all right, and they've decoded them, and they know where to look. Both men were on the point of passing out of the room. In here, said Anthony, jerking his head back. Exactly, in here. But they haven't found the prize yet, and they're going to run a pretty risk trying to get it. I suppose, said Anthony, that you've got a plan in that subtle head of yours? Battle returned no answer. He looked particularly stolid and unintelligent. Then, very slowly, he winked. Want my help? Asked Anthony. I do, and I shall want someone else's. Who is that? Mrs. Revels. You may not have noticed it, Mr. Cade, but she's a lady who has a particularly beguiling way with her. I've noticed it all right, said Anthony. He glanced at his watch. I'm inclined to agree with you about bed, Battle. A dip in the lake and a hearty breakfast will be far more to the point. He ran lightly upstairs to his bedroom. Whistling to himself, he discarded his evening clothes and picked up a dressing gown and a bath towel. Then suddenly he stopped dead in front of the dressing table, staring at the object that reposed demurely in front of the looking-glass. For a moment he could not believe his eyes. He took it up, examined it closely. Yes, there was no mistake. It was the bundle of letters signed Virginia Revel. They were intact. Not one was missing. Anthony dropped into a chair, the letters in his hand. My brain must be cracking, he murmured. I can't understand a quarter of what is going on in this house. Why should the letters reappear like a damned conjuring trick? Who put them on my dressing table? Chapter 21. Mr. Isakstein's suitcase. At 10 o'clock that morning, Lord Caterham and his daughter were breakfasting. Bundle was looking very thoughtful. Father, she said at last. Lord Caterham, absorbed in the Times, did not reply. Father, said Bundle again, more sharply. Lord Caterham, torn from his interested perusal of forthcoming sales of rare books, looked up absent-mindedly. He said. Did you speak? Yes. Who is it who's had breakfast? She nodded towards a place that had evidently been occupied. The rest were all expectant. Oh, what's his name? Fat Ikey? Bundle and her father had enough sympathy between them to comprehend each other's somewhat misleading observations. That's it. Did I see you talking to the detective this morning before breakfast? Lord Caterham sighed. Yes, he buttonholed me in the hall. I do think the hours before breakfast should be sacred. I shall have to go abroad. The strain on my nerves, Bundle interrupted unceremoniously. What did he say? Said everyone who wanted to could clear out. Well, said Bundle, that's all right. That's what you've been wanting. I know, but he didn't leave it at that. He went on to say that nevertheless he wanted me to ask everyone to stay on. I don't understand, said Bundle, wrinkling her nose. So confusing and contradictory, complained Lord Caterham. And before breakfast too. What did you say? Oh, I agreed, of course. It's never any good arguing with these people. Especially before breakfast, continued Lord Caterham, reverting to his principal grievance. Who have you asked so far? Cade. He was up very early this morning. He's going to stop on. I don't mind that. I can't quite make the fellow out, but I like him. I like him very much. So does Virginia, said Bundle, drawing a pattern on the table with her fork. Eh? And so do I. But that doesn't seem to matter. And I asked Isaacstein, continued Lord Caterham. Well, but fortunately he's got to go back to town. Don't forget to order the car for the 10.40, by the way. All right. Now if I can only get rid of Fish too, continued Lord Caterham, his spirits rising. I thought you liked talking to him about your moldy old books. So I do, so I do, so I did, rather. But it gets monotonous when one finds that one is always doing all the talking. Fish is very interested, but he never volunteers any statements of his own. It's better than doing all the listening, said Bundle, like one does with George Lomax. Lord Caterham shuddered at the remembrance. George is all very well on platforms, said Bundle. I've clapped him myself, though of course I know all PG 190 the time that he's talking balderdash. And anyway I'm a socialist. I know, my dear, I know, said Lord Caterham hastily. It's all right, said Bundle. I'm not going to bring politics into the house. That's what George does, public speaking in private life. It ought to be abolished by Act of Parliament. Quite so, said Lord Caterham. What about Virginia? Asked Bundle. Is she to be asked to stop on? Battle said everybody, says he firmly. Have you asked her to be my stepmie yet? I don't think it would be any good, said Lord Caterham mournfully, although she did call me a darling last night. But that's the worst of these attractive young women with affectionate dispositions. They'll say anything, and they mean absolutely nothing by it. No, agreed Bundle. It would have been much more hopeful if she'd thrown a boot at you or tried to bite you. You modern young people seem to have such unpleasant ideas about lovemaking, said Lord Caterham plaintively. It comes from reading the Sheik, said Bundle. Desert love, throw her about, etc. What is the Sheik? Asked Lord Caterham simply. Is it a poem? Bundle looked at him with commiserating pity. Then she rose and kissed the top of his head. Dear old daddy, she remarked, and sprang lightly out of the window. Lord Caterham went back to the sale rooms. He jumped when addressed suddenly by Mr. Hiram Fish, who had made his usual noiseless entry. Good morning, Lord Caterham. Oh, good morning, said Lord Caterham. Good morning. Nice day. The weather is delightful, said Mr. Fish. He helped himself to coffee. By way of food, he took a piece of dry toast. Do I hear correctly that the embargo is removed? He asked after a minute or two. That we are all free to depart. Yes, yes, said Lord Caterham. As a matter of fact, I mean that I shall be delighted. His conscience drove him on. Only too delighted if you will stay on for a little. Why, Lord Caterham? It's been a beastly visit, I know, Lord Caterham hurried on. Too bad. Shan't blame you for wanting to run away. You misjudge me, Lord Caterham. The associations have been painful, no one could deny that point. But the English country life, as lived in the mansions of the great, has a powerful attraction for me. I am interested in the study of those conditions. It is a thing we lack completely in America. I shall be only too delighted to accept your very kind invitation and stay on. Oh, well, said Lord Caterham, that's that. Absolutely delighted, my dear fellow, absolutely delighted. Spurring himself onto a false geniality of manner, Lord Caterham murmured something about having to see his bailiff, and escaped from the room. In the hall, he saw Virginia just descending the staircase. Shall I take you in to breakfast? Asked Lord Caterham tenderly. I've had it in bed, thank you. I was frightfully sleepy this morning. She yawned. Had a bad night, perhaps. Not exactly a bad night. From one point of view, decidedly a good night. Oh, Lord Caterham. She slipped PG 192 her hand inside his arm and gave it a squeeze. I am enjoying myself. You were a darling to ask me down. You'll stop on for a bit then, won't you? Battle is lifting the embargo, but I want you to stay particularly. So does Bundle. Of course I'll stay. It's sweet of you to ask me. Ah, said Lord Caterham. He sighed. What is your secret sorrow? Asked Virginia. Has anyone bitten you? That's just it, said Lord Caterham mournfully. Virginia looked puzzled. You don't feel, by any chance, that you want to throw a boot at me? No, I can see you don't. Oh, well, it's of no consequence. Lord Caterham drifted sadly away, and Virginia passed out through a side door into the garden. She stood there for a moment, breathing in the crisp October air, which was infinitely refreshing to one in her slightly jaded state. She started a little to find Superintendent Battle at her elbow. The man seemed to have an extraordinary knack of appearing out of space without the least warning. Good morning, Mrs. Revel. Not too tired, I hope. Virginia shook her head. It was a most exciting night, she said. Well worth the loss of a little sleep. The only thing is, today seems a little dull after it. There's a nice shady place down under that cedar tree, remarked the superintendent. Shall I take a chair down to it for you, if you think it's the best thing for me to do? Said Virginia solemnly. You're very quick, Mrs. Revel. Yes, it's quite true. I do want a word with you. He picked up a long wicker chair and carried it down the lawn. Virginia followed him with a cushion under her arm. Very dangerous place, that terrace, remarked the detective. That is, if you want to have a private conversation. I'm getting excited again. Superintendent Battle. Oh, it's nothing important. He took out a big watch and glanced at it. 10:30. I'm starting for Wyvern Abbey in 10 minutes to report to Mr. Lomax. Plenty of time. I only wanted to know if you could tell me a little more about Mr. Cade. About Mr. Cade? Virginia was startled. Yes, where you first met him, and how long you've known him, and so forth. Battle's manner was easy and pleasant enough. He evening refrained from looking at her, and the fact that he did so made her vaguely uneasy. It's more difficult than you think, she said at last. He did me a great service once. Battle interrupted her. Before you go any further, Mrs. Revel, I'd just like to say something. Last night, after you and Mr. Eversley had gone to bed, Mr. Cade told me all about the letters and the man who was killed in your house. He did? Gasped Virginia. Yes, and very wisely too. It clears up a lot of misunderstanding. There's only one thing he didn't tell me, how long he had known you. Now I've a little idea of my own about that. You shall tell me if I'm right or wrong. I think that the day he came to your house in Pont Street was the first time you had ever seen him. Ah, I see I'm right. It was so. Virginia said nothing. For the first time she felt afraid of this stolid man with the expressionless face. She understood what Anthony had meant when he said there were no flies on Superintendent Battle. Has he ever told you anything about his life? The detective continued. Before he was in South Africa, IPG 194 mean. Canada, or before that, the Sudan, or about his boyhood? Virginia merely shook her head. And yet I'd bet he's got something worth telling. You can't mistake the face of a man who's led a life of daring and adventure. He could tell you some interesting tales if he cared to. If you want to know about his past life, why don't you cable to that friend of his, Mr. McGrath? Virginia asked. Oh, we have. But it seems he's up country somewhere. Still, there's no doubt Mr. Cade was in Bulawayo when he said he was. But I wondered what he'd been doing before he came to South Africa. He'd only had that job with Castles about a month. He took out his watch again. I must be off. The car will be waiting. Virginia watched him retreat to the house. But she did not move from her chair. She hoped that Anthony may appear and join her. Instead came Bill Eversley with a prodigious yawn. Thank God, I've got a chance to speak to you at last, Virginia, he complained. Well, speak to me very gently, Bill darling, or I shall burst into tears. Has someone been bullying you? Not exactly bullying me. Getting inside my mind and turning it inside out. I feel as though I'd been jumped on by an elephant. Not Battle. Yes, Battle. He's a terrible man, really. Well, never mind Battle. I say, Virginia, I do love you so awfully. Not this morning, Bill. I'm not strong enough. Anyway, I've always told you the best people don't propose before lunch. Good Lord, said Bill. I could propose to you before breakfast. Virginia shuddered. Bill, be sensible and intelligent for a minute. I want to ask your advice. If you'd once make up your mind to it, and say you'd marry me, you'd feel miles better, I'm sure. Happier, you know, and more settled down. Listen to me, Bill. Proposing to me is your I'd fix. All men propose when they're bored and can't think of anything to say. Remember my age and my widowed state, and go and make love to a pure young girl. My darling Virginia, oh, blast. Here's that French idiot bearing down on us. It was truly M. Lemoyne, black-bearded and correct of demeanor as ever. Good morning, madam. You are not fatigued, I trust. Not in the least. That is excellent. Good morning, Mr. Eversley. How would it be if we promenaded ourselves a little, the three of us? Suggested the Frenchman. How about it, Bill? Said Virginia. Oh, all right, said the unwilling young gentleman by her side. He heaved himself up from the grass, and the three of them walked slowly along, Virginia between the two men. She was sensible at once of a strange undercurrent of excitement in the Frenchman, though she had no clue as to what caused it. Soon, with her usual skill, she was putting him at his ease, asking him questions, listening to his answers, and gradually drawing him out. Soon he was telling them anecdotes of the famous King Victor. He talked well, albeit with a certain bitterness, as he described the various ways in which the Detective Bureau had been outwitted. But all the time, despite the real absorption of Lemoyne in his own narrative, Virginia had a feeling that he had some other object in view. Moreover, she judged that Lemoyne, under cover of his story, was deliberately PG 196 striking out his own course across the park. They were not just strolling idly. He was deliberately guiding them in a certain direction. Suddenly, he broke off his story and looked round. They were standing just where the drive intersected the park before turning an abrupt corner by a clump of trees. Lemoyne was staring at a vehicle approaching them from the direction of the house. Virginia's eyes followed his. It's the luggage cart, she said, taking Isakstein's luggage and his valet to the station. Is that so? Said Lemoyne. He glanced down at his own watch and started. 1,000 pardons. I have been longer here than I meant. Such charming company. Is it possible, do you think, that I may have a lift to the village? He stepped out onto the drive and signaled with his arm. The luggage cart stopped, and after a word or two of explanation Lemoyne climbed in behind. He raised his hat politely to Virginia and drove off. The other two stood and watched the cart disappearing with puzzled expressions. Just as the cart swung round the bend, a suitcase fell off into the drive. The cart went on. Come on, said Virginia to Bill. We're going to see something interesting. That suitcase was thrown out. Nobody's noticed it, said Bill. They ran down the drive towards the fallen piece of luggage. Just as they reached it, Lemoyne came round the corner of the bend on foot. He was hot from walking fast. I was obliged to descend, he said pleasantly. I found that I had left something behind. This, said Bill, indicating the suitcase. It was a handsome case of heavy pigskin, with the initials H. I on it. What a pity, said Lemoyne gently. It must have fallen out. Shall we lift it from the road? Without waiting for a reply, he picked up the suitcase and carried it over to the belt of trees. He stooped over it. Something flashed in his hand, and the lock slipped back. He spoke, and his voice was totally different, quick and commanding. The car will be here in a minute, he said. Is it in sight? Virginia looked back towards the house. No. Good. With deft fingers, he tossed the things out of the suitcase. Gold-topped bottle, silk pajamas, a variety of socks. Suddenly his whole figure stiffened. He caught up what appeared to be a bundle of silk underwear and unrolled it rapidly. A slight exclamation broke from Bill. In the center of the bundle was a heavy revolver. "I hear the horn," said Virginia. Like lightning, Lemon repacked the suitcase. The revolver he wrapped in a silk handkerchief of his own and slipped into his pocket. He snapped the locks of the suitcase and turned quickly to Bill. "Take it. Madam will be with you. Stop the car and explain that it fell off the luggage cart. Do not mention me." Bill stepped quickly down to the drive just as the big Lanchester limousine with Isaac Stein inside it came round the corner. The chauffeur slowed down, and Bill swung the suitcase up to him. "Fell off the luggage cart," he explained. "We happened to see it." He caught a momentary glimpse of a startled yellow face as the financier stared at him, and then the car swept on again. They went back to Lemon. He was standing with the revolver in his hand and a look of gloating satisfaction in his face. "A long shot," he said. "A very long shot."